All right, we're just getting word that NASA is holding a press conference at the Johnson Space Center in Houston, Texas. Let's listen in now.
Operations here at the Johnson Space Center. Again, we'll hear from both gentlemen and then we'll throw it open for questions. And I just want to caution up front, please keep your questions brief. One question per reporter. We've got a limited amount of time, about 90 minutes for today's briefing. And I've got a lot of centers, as you can imagine, that are interested in asking questions. So with that, I'll turn it over to Ron.
I'm sure that you can imagine that for us, the last 24 to 36 hours have been a blur. It's been a difficult time period for us, but our teams have reacted professionally, with much courage, and we've begun the painful process of trying to piece together the events that occurred leading up to the loss of Columbia. Today, I will update you on our latest information relative to the engineering facts as we know them today, and let you know a little bit about how we are organized and how we're going about retrieving data at different locations in Northeast Texas and here in Houston, and different sites, field centers in Florida and in Alabama. But before I go any further, I would like to take a moment and express my gratitude on behalf of myself and everyone at NASA, the families of the astronauts, and all of those in our country and around the world affected by this tragedy. Our deepest appreciation for their overwhelming support and expressions of sympathy. It has made a lot of difference in our lives and the lives of our families, and we appreciate it very much. Secondly, the assistance and offers of assistance that we have received from other agencies has been a significant help to us. From law enforcement, emergency response personnel, and from the general public, the response has been overwhelming, and we appreciate it. For those families and individuals in East Texas, in Fort Worth, in Dallas, in Lufkin, and Nacogdoches, those that have gone out of their way to help us identify debris and report it to the proper officials, we thank you. And we again ask that you be cautious. Again, we state that the debris, no matter how small, could have toxic consequences. And so we ask you to notify the proper personnel in a timely fashion. For what you have done so far, we express our thanks. Gathering this information, gathering the debris, notifying to us the locations has been important for us in this first step of piecing together the puzzle, and we are beginning to make progress. Let me talk a little bit about our organization. I believe a press release has come out identifying a Columbia Accident Investigation Board. That board is on its way to Shreveport, Barksdale Air Force Base, should be arriving there this afternoon. We have a mishap investigation team already on the scene with headquarters at Barksdale Air Force Base. We have other teams in the local area, in Lufkin, in Fort Worth, and Dallas, spreading out to small communities in the general area, working with law enforcement, state and local law enforcement, to help us identify and collect debris. At headquarters, we have formed a contingency action team. Underneath that contingency action team is a local mishap response team that is led here at the Johnson Space Center by the Shuttle program office. Reporting to the mishap response team are several important teams. The mishap investigation team, headquartered right now at Barksdale Air Force Base, reports on the status of debris and human remain collection. The MIT, as we've referred to it, is made up of several different agencies. This is a partnership, a collective group of individuals now working together, comprised of NASA, FEMA, NTSB, FBI, state and local law enforcement, and Department of Defense personnel. It's a large team, but it's a necessary team in order for us to do our job properly. This team reports to us twice a day, once in the morning, once in the afternoon, on the status of their efforts and their progress. In addition to the MIT, we have numerous engineering teams that are beginning the laborious work of pouring through data, taking their time to understand the different pieces and elements of the data, and we're making progress, and I'm pleased at the progress that they're making, but it's going to take us some days and weeks ahead to put it all together and make sure we have it correct. Both the engineering teams and the MIT report to the mishap response team, and the mishap response team reports to the headquarters contingency action team. All those teams are again supporting the Columbia Accident Investigation Board. So that's how we are organized. As you can imagine, yesterday, all these different elements were coming together, and I'm proud of the men and women that under difficult circumstances were able to organize, communicate, relocate, plan their activities to the point where today we're becoming very organized, very supportive of each other, and working together very well. Let me talk to you a little bit about an update in the technical arena. Caution you, first of all, that what I'm telling you today is again fluid. It builds on yesterday's briefing, gives a little more detail, but I'm confident that even what I tell you today will be fluid and will change from day to day for a while. It's just the nature of these types of investigations. It's the nature of trying to work through an engineering problem. First reports are notoriously unreliable. Second reports are better. Third reports, you start getting down to the real details and you have some confidence. And so we're on this path of getting to the third and fourth reports to get some confidence. So I'm going to be honest and open with you and tell you exactly what we know, and hope you understand that from day to day it will change. But let me give you some time correlation with location on the entry yesterday from California to Northeast Texas in a little more detail. At 7:53 a.m. Central Standard Time, and all times will be Central Standard Time, as we were over California, 4 left-hand Elevon hydraulic return line temperature measurements dropped off scale, as we talked about yesterday. The left brake line, strut actuator, and uplock actuator temperature measurements rose significantly, 20 to 30 degrees in 5 minutes. This is significant in that these measurements were located in the wheel well, left wheel well. This was the first occurrence of a significant thermal event. It's also important for us that we understand and have found out that the Elevon temperature measurements that I talked about had dropped off scale low are routed adjacent to the wheel well area. At 7:54, we were over eastern California and western Nevada. At this time, the mid-fuselage left bond line temp showed unusual temperature rise. The mid-fuselage is not, if you were looking at the vehicle, wing on the left side, the left fuselage, if you looked at the left fuselage, the wing below it, I'm talking about a temperature on the side of the vehicle, the left-hand side of the vehicle above the wing. Unusual temperature rise. The temperature rose 60 degrees over 5 minutes. Whereas on the right-hand side of the vehicle, in the same location but opposite on the right-hand side, showed a nominal 15-degree rise, 15-degree rise over 5 minutes. Another interesting piece of information, that even though the mid-fuselage bond line temp showed a 60-degree rise over 5 minutes, just inside that wall, outside we saw a 60-degree rise in 5 minutes, just inside the wall, in the payload bay, our cryo tanks, our cryogenic tanks, were nominal. So it didn't look like there was any increase in temperature within the payload bay as far as we are able to discern today. At 7:58 a.m. over New Mexico, the roll trim in the elevons started to increase, indicating that we had an increase in drag on the left side of the vehicle. Does this mean something to us? We're not sure. It can be indicative of rough tile. It can be indicative of perhaps missing tile. We're not sure yet. We do know it's indicative that there was an increase in drag on the left side of the vehicle. At this time, we also lost the left main landing gear tire pressure and wheel temperature measurements. We're fairly confident that this loss of information was measurement related and not loss of the tires themselves, because the measurements were staggered in their loss. If we would have lost the tire, if they would have lost physically, we believe that we would have lost all the measurements at the same time. But that didn't occur. We lost the measurements in a staggered fashion, so it indicates to us that it was instrumentation rather than a physical loss of the tire. At 7:59 a.m., we were over West Texas. Again, we see an increase in the roll trim as indicated by elevon motion, indicating that the vehicle was reacting to an increased drag on the left-hand side. The flight control system was countering that drag by trying to command the vehicle to roll to the right-hand side. So we were seeing a drag causing the vehicle to roll to the left. The flight control system was commanding surfaces to get the vehicle back to where it believed it should be, more to the roll to the right. Soon after, we had loss of signal. We do believe that there is additional information to us, another 32 seconds that we believe if we go into our computer system on the ground that we can pull out additional data in the neighborhood of 32 seconds after the point yesterday where we lost signal, and that may give us additional information about what happened subsequent to that time. In addition to that, yesterday you informed me of a report from California about an observer seeing what was indicated to be debris shedding from the orbiter. We have talked to that observer and we have his written statement. We believe that is important to us because we are trying to correlate what that observer experienced and saw with the timeline that I just related to you. And during the coming hours, overnight and tomorrow, we're going to overlay his report with what the data shows to us, and hopefully the two of them will help us piece together a path that we think might lead us to the cause. Again, very early in our analysis, and we're still poring over a lot of data. So bear with us as we go through this effort, and bear with us as we report to you, because it's going to be fluid and it's going to change, and it's certainly possible that we'll contradict ourselves from day to day. That's just the nature of what we have to go through right now. You asked me yesterday whether we're concentrating on the tile only. We are not. There are other areas. We're looking at structure. We're looking at thermal indications. We're looking at flight control. And as we bury down into the data, we're getting more and more information that will help us decipher the problem and get the pieces of the puzzle together to help us find the cause. So we're gaining ground, not a lot, we're gaining ground, and in the coming days we'll give you more information as we get it. At this point, I'd like to turn some time over to Bob, and then we'll respond to your questions.
First off, I'd like to thank all of you on behalf of the families for the tremendous outpouring of support from across the country. It really means a lot to them. I'd also like to ask the media to respect the privacy of the families during this difficult time. I know when the time comes and they're ready, they'll be more than willing to talk with all of you. It's been a tremendously difficult last couple days. Yesterday was probably the hardest day in my life, to have to sit down with the families of close friends and tell them that their husbands and wives and moms and dads aren't going to be coming home. And if you've never had to do that, I hope you never have to. I'd also like to say that the support that was provided in Florida to the families was outstanding. I couldn't be more proud of our team down there and what they did. It went very well from that point of view. And getting the families home here to Houston, where they could have a better support network, went well. We are working very closely with the families. We in the astronaut office, it is our family. And we have assigned astronauts to each of the families as their casualty assistance officers to support them and provide what they need. We're focused on a very difficult time right now, and Ron gave you a lot of details about what happened. But I'd also like to point out that we're still flying in space. We have a crew on orbit right now, and we have a space station on orbit, and they also deserve our full attention to ensure that they have a safe and productive mission. Along those lines, I had a long talk with Sox and Don and Nikolai this morning, mostly with Sox and Don. And I want you to know they're being kept fully informed about what's going on down here on the ground. Mostly it was just sharing. I shared with them. They're grieving up there also, and they feel a little isolated. We're keeping them fully informed, and I told Sox I wouldn't keep anything from him. Anything that I knew down here on the ground about what was going on, he would know on orbit. And I shared the technical details that Ron shared with you, with the crew. And I've shared some other things I'll tell you about. They want to get through this process, and it's harder for them being detached from it in space. But all I can tell you is they are in tremendous spirits. They're proud to be where they are. They're proud to be part of the space program and be contributing to the science that's going on the International Space Station. I shared stories with them about the crew. I talked about better memories, about an on-orbit video conference I had with them, and how happy they were to be there and how much it meant to them to be contributing on this mission. And those are the memories I'm always going to cherish. I'm sure you've heard, before I go on, just from another point of view as far as supporting the crew on orbit, they were very glad to hear about the successful Progress launch and are looking forward to docking of the next Progress vehicle about 0850 Central Time on Tuesday morning. They're well prepared for it and looking forward to getting that those supplies up there. I'm also sure that you have all heard reports of the recovery of human remains in the debris field. I want you to know that the federal authorities, the local authorities, are doing an extremely professional job in the field, that we have astronauts in the field with them, and that we're treating those remains with the ultimate respect and care that they deserve. And out of respect for the families, I'm not going to go into any more detail than that. I just want you to know that we're honoring our fellow crewmates, and we're taking care of them. And it's a tough time, but I want you to know that we're going to get through this. We're a close-knit group. We're a family, and we support one another. And this is going to pass. We're going to continue to fly, and we are flying, and we're going to continue to do great things. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. Let's see, to give you a rundown, we're going to start here in Houston, and we're going to go to the Kennedy Space Center for questions, followed by headquarters in Washington, followed by the Marshall Space Flight Center in Huntsville, Alabama, and then to Lufkin, Texas, where the command center is located. So those are the sites for questions. As you can see, we have a lot of places to go. I would caution you and urge you to please ask one question. Please don't ask a follow-up. We don't have enough time for that. And if you've already heard the question from someone else, don't ask it again. You're just going to take time away from everybody else. For here in Houston, please wait for a microphone. We have some mic handlers here. State your name and affiliation, and we'll start. Why don't we start right here, Greg, on the front row, couple.
Gene Gleason from Channel 7 in Los Angeles. I know you're looking at flight controls and other things, but is there anything in the activity of the shuttle orbiter that would be consistent with the types of maneuvers you're seeing and the response from the Elevon and the heating that would be other than missing tiles?
What's a little intriguing is that it looks like the orbiter is doing just what it should do. It's responding to command, it's maintaining its attitude. A little bit of a drag increase and a reaction from flight control is not alarming in any sense. When you piece it together with all the other events that we've talked about, we believe that might be a piece of the puzzle. But even the trim that I talked to you about and the fact that the flight control system was asking for a little bit more trim to counter what looks like an increased drag on the left-hand side, it's well within the ability of the flight control system to respond to and to react. It's out of family in the sense that we've never seen it to this degree. But it does not approach the limits of saturating the flight control system. So it's an interesting piece of data that's part of our equation, and we're putting it in with everything else we've got to look at, and I think it will help us in the long run. But by itself, it was not tremendously unusual.
If I can follow up.
No, you can't. Bill.
Sorry, it's Bill Harwood with CBS. Ron, you carefully led us into the landing gear wheel well with some of these temp sensors and tying the hydraulic system to what you were seeing other places. Realizing speculation is obviously what you're trying to avoid, but just getting me in the wheel well makes me wonder if the temperatures that you saw and the drag you saw, would that in any way be consistent with either a landing gear door coming off or an ET umbilical attached door opening, and have you ruled out any connection with the impact, debris impact from shortly after launch with the insulation?
Well, we certainly know that the wheel well area is one of our sensitive areas thermally. We've analyzed that area intensively in the past, and the loss of any one single tile, we believe, would not be a cause for loss of a vehicle. In fact, we believe we can lose a tile in different locations, and all by themselves, we don't believe that would represent loss of vehicle. It may represent some structural damage, but not loss of a vehicle. Certainly, as we start talking more about the wheel well area, what's interesting to us about it is yesterday we had indications of the trailing edge, left inboard, left outboard elevon. As we are starting to look at the trail of this wiring as it goes through the fuselage and out to the elevon, it has a common point as it goes adjacent to the wheel well. That's interesting to us. That's all we know today. So as we go through the coming days, maybe I'll get more information to add to this puzzle. I don't have any more than what I told you today. I don't want to speculate any more than the information I gave you. Be cautious. I know I'm thinking the same thing you're thinking, but I can't go beyond that. And I want to be careful that I don't jump to conclusions, because if I do, I'll miss something else that may be very important. So you got the point. There may be some significance to the wheel well. We're going to look in that area more carefully. We're going to inspect vehicles down in Florida. OV-103 is going through its maintenance down period. We may elect to go into the wing and look how this wiring has been implemented in the fuselage to help us understand what 102 looked like, to see if there was any thermal breaches. Would that also affect the wheel well and the wiring? So we've got some more detective work, but that's why I say we're making progress inch by inch.
Eric Melnick, LA Times. Did this spacecraft carry a flight data recorder and cockpit voice recorder? And if so, were they armored to withstand this sort of forces?
Well, we carry a voice recorder. We carry data recorders, but they are not armored in the way that you think about commercial aircraft in a black box. We do not have that capability. It's doubtful that those avionics boxes survived. Right here.
Haven Daily, News 24 Houston. Regarding the International Space Station, there was some initial concern by the public about getting supplies to the station. Can you talk a little bit more detail about what's going to be happening on Tuesday, how you're getting the supplies there, what's being taken there, and also how this accident is going to affect future deliveries?
Well, I'll leave that to the space station program to discuss in greater detail, but it was the planned progress launch bringing up the nominal supplies. The program is making every effort to ensure that the crew on orbit has all that they need to continually man the space station, and right now there's absolutely no concern for any of their consumables on board.
Jenny Blankenship with KI, CBS News in Austin. Many of us attended church services this morning for the astronauts, and I think a lot of people tend to think of them as scientists or science-oriented people, but can any of you tell me how big a role God or spirituality plays in astronauts' lives? I understand it's very strong.
Well, I'll tell you right now, I wish I had half the faith of Rick and Evelyn Husband. I don't know of any finer individual or anybody that has a greater faith in his Creator, and it's been a source of strength for Evelyn. I know that she's content to know that Rick is with his Lord now, and that brings a lot of peace to her. Rick was a tremendous guy.
Samantha Levine, U.S. News and World Report. Do you have any information on the size and or weight of any pieces of material that may have broken from the shuttle on its ascent?
Are you talking about the ascent?
Yes.
We didn't have any pieces that broke away from the shuttle, the orbiter, during the launch phase. The only thing that we know of and that we're looking into is what I previously briefed, and that was the piece of foam insulation that was shed by the external tank.
Sanjay Bhatt, Palm Beach Post. You talked a little bit about the drag on the left wing and how the craft has measures it can take. Could you elaborate a little bit on whether there are any kind of optional maneuvers that the crew had to ease off of that left wing in their entry?
At this time, during re-entry, the crew is watching the flight control system do its job automatically. And they would not be alarmed. They may watch the trim. They'll have indications in the cockpit of the flight control system trying to trim out the vehicle. And if they would certainly know that the vehicle was trying to maybe yaw and roll a little bit to the left. And the flight control surfaces would respond appropriately, and just like in an airplane, they would correct it and move the orbiter and straighten the nose out and get it to the right attitude. Very small motions, very small degrees. And the crew would watch it. I'm sure they would talk about it, but there would be really no cause for alarm. The vehicle was doing what it was designed to do, and the software and flight control system were handling any disturbance.
Gentlemen, Chuck Gowdy from ABC7 in Chicago. You touched on this a little bit in that answer, but is there any evidence that the crew knew that there was a problem during the 6-minute timeline that you were just talking about? And is there evidence that they indeed did what you just said they could do?
Well, based on our familiarity with the crew and the training regiment, we know that's what they are doing during entry. We know they are monitoring flight control systems. We know that they are monitoring attitude. We train them to do that. As pilots, that is what they're going to do. So we're confident that's exactly what they were doing. We have no data, no communication, no evidence that the crew was alarmed, had any communication. We had no communication with the ground concerning these parameters that I've talked to you about. I feel certain that on board they could have talked one to another to say, look at that particular parameter, we ought to watch it, but I'm speculating that's what happened. I feel confident as pilots that's what they would do, but we have no information from the crew to the ground that will confirm what they were doing on board.
Phil Robertson with WFTV in Orlando. Going back to the discussions concerning the debris hitting the tiles, were those engineering meetings, was the discussion intense? Was there a lot of discussion about that? Was anybody even throwing up a red flag or throwing out possible contingencies or scenarios that might need to take place just in case there was some drag or anything else?
We handled that debris impact like we would do any off-nominal event. Number one, it occurred. 2, where did it hit the orbiter? 3, since it hit the orbiter, what could be any consequence of hitting the orbiter? Is it severe or inconsequential? And should we do anything about it? We went through the gamut of what we normally do. The management was involved, the technical people, the technical experts were involved, and it had a thorough discussion. Our technical experts believed the debris that hit the orbiter was inconsequential. It was not going to represent an impact to our flight control qualities or our safety. But even then, we talked about what if it did? What would we do even if it did? And we had that discussion. We talked about in our technical teams, is there a way that if we were wrong, was there a way during entry that would minimize the thermal profile? And we reminded ourselves, if you think about how we have designed this vehicle with these tiles, we fly the minimal profile today. Anything beyond this profile aggravates the temperature extremes. And that seems logical. It is logical because I'm reusing this vehicle over and over again. So I'm trying to send it through an environment that minimizes the wear and tear on the structure and the tile. And so we were already at the minimum environment as far as coming in during entry. We asked ourselves, is there any other option? There's no other option. If you want to come back home you have got to come back through the atmosphere. And the way this vehicle flies, you have to get the nose up in the air and you have to protect yourself from the environment. And we put it in such an attitude as to minimize the thermal effects on the vehicle. We were there already. There was nothing we can do from an environment or a technique point of view. So we talked about that. We reinforced our beliefs, we reinforced our knowledge. We went through the what-if scenario. If we were wrong, what's the worst case? All that was talked about. Again, we had strong participation from our safety and quality, strong participation from our flight crew members, our flight control, our mission ops, all the technical and engineering disciplines, the appropriate management, and we concluded that it did not represent a safety concern. It represented a turnaround issue that we needed to go investigate. And we still believe that today, but as we gather more evidence, certainly more of the evidence may point us in a different direction, and we're very interested in that.
You mentioned an additional, Harry Forrestal from CBC Television, you mentioned an additional 32 seconds of data that you think may be in your computers. Can you tell us anything about the nature of that data, whether there is any question that it is in your computers, and how long it would take to extract and analyze?
It should take us no time at all to get that data. The reason it doesn't come forward right away is because we have criteria. When the data starts getting ratty or doesn't represent itself in the framework of the packaging of the data down to the ground, if it's not, for example, if it's not 80% or 90% good, then we throw up flags and don't allow it to be displayed to our flight control system. So we're going after data that we know we can extract. It may have been flagged as bad information because it violated this criteria, but yet we can go in and extract it, and let's say half the frames were good. Well, we're going to go after that 50%. Maybe that information may lend something to our investigation. We've done it in the past. We did it during Challenger, and so we're going to go after this information.
Mark Harrow from the Houston Chronicle. I have a timeline question for Ron Dittemore. Could you explain this flap or the foam issue on a timeline basis? When your engineering analysis saw the film in flight day or mission elapsed time, when you began an internal discussion of this issue and when you resolved it? And can you put it on some sort of day scale or something that we can relate to in terms of the launch or the landing?
I can certainly do that. I don't have all that information with me today. We will provide you with that information. Recall that this event happened around 80 seconds after launch. We didn't recognize that this event occurred until the following day because it is our practice to review all the launch films in great detail, frame by frame. And when you have a very small debris, a piece of debris or foam that sheds off the vehicle, it's not obvious that that occurs, especially as you look up into the plume. You're looking at a lot of rocket engine and solid rocket motor plume, and you're not able to see a very piece of debris unless you look at it very carefully with the right experts on the film. And we do this by practice the following day, and we report any occurrences of debris. This was done just as we planned. It was reported on the following day, the day after launch, and at that point we kicked off the engineering teams to look and see whether that represented a concern. What I don't know today is, was it 1 day or 3 days before that issue was resolved to our satisfaction? It was more than one, and I just don't know how long, and we'll take a note to get that information to you outside this briefing.
Kelly Young at Florida Today. For context, can you describe to me the reasons you don't want to leave the station unmanned and the process for powering it down?
Well, I think we don't want to leave it unmanned because we're exploring, we're doing science, we have a mission. We're up there to do what we set out to do, and that's not leave the space station. The crew is working very hard up there. They've got a lot to do, and it just wouldn't be right to quit.
And at this point, there's no reason to consider unmanning the station. We have sufficient supplies. We're able to communicate and perform and function as planned. We're early in our investigation on the shuttle, and so it's premature for us to consider even talking about that. And it is our goal and our objective to stay continuously manned unless there would be some other reason not to.
Let's get Mike over here.
Mike Cabbage with the Orlando Sentinel for Ron. Insulation and ice coming off the tank and striking the orbiter during ascent is certainly not anything new. Could you talk a bit about what the program has done in recent years to minimize the chance of damage coming from events like that? And is this a sort of calculated risk or inherent risk in the shuttle's design that's always going to be there?
Well, it's very important for us to understand the debris field and the possibility or potential of debris. Small pieces of debris may not be any problem for you at all, depending on when that debris occurs. We have established criteria, even before liftoff, that we will not permit a launch if we have ice on the tank or ice on the vehicle in specific locations. And these locations have been analyzed in such a way that we know if we have so much ice at a predetermined thickness, we know that it could shed off the tank and could impact either the windows of the orbiter or the underside of the orbiter and affect the tile. So we're very cautious about debris and anything that might represent a debris source. Ice would be one of those. We have had instances in the past where we have shed debris. I talked to you yesterday about an insulation problem on the tank a year or two ago, where during the launch phase we were reaching an environmental condition where the insulation was outgassing in such a way that it was popping pieces of insulation off the tank, and it was impacting the bottom of the orbiter, and it was damaging the tile. And the tile damage was somewhat superficial, but because the popcorning was numerous, it represented a significant increase in the number of tiles that were being damaged, and hence when we got back to turn the vehicle around, we had a lot more work to do to repair tiles and to replace them. So we were very aggressive at trying to understand this popcorning to the point of putting cameras on the boosters and looking at the tank so that we can actually see the phenomena occur. And then we were better able to resolve it, and which we did resolve it. We determined the root cause and we implemented corrective action, and we do not have the popcorning phenomena occur any longer. It wasn't too long ago that we flew a camera on the top of the tank, and you saw that we flew it once. Our purpose in flying the camera was to get a bird's eye view of looking down at the tank and the orbiter interface to learn if there was anything that was going on that perhaps that we hadn't predicted and could not see from the ground. And we built these cameras and positioned them in such a way for just that type of engineering evaluation. Now, we flew it once, and we were surprised a little bit by the hazing that we got at SRB separation, and so we're working on that particular camera. But that's the type of activity we would put in place, and those are the types of preventative actions that we are working on to make sure that we mitigate any possibility of debris.
Lisa Stark with ABC News. When you realized that you had this debris that had struck the shuttle and you started your analysis, what was the discussion about trying to take a look either through satellites or these large telescopes that the military has, and why was the decision made not to try that?
We certainly had that discussion because we know there is a capability available to us to take a look at the orbiter and perhaps get us some pictures that are quite a bit a close-up view. I talked about this yesterday where we had a drag chute door fall off Did you listen so I don't have to go through that one again? We had the drag chute door fall off right there at the launch phase. When we got to orbit, we were very interested in what the back end of the vehicle looked like. And we actually did take some pictures. We positioned the orbiter in a particular attitude, and we took some pictures. We reviewed the pictures, and they did not reveal a lot of granularity that would help us. We knew that as our background. That was our database. We believed that taking a picture at the bottom of the orbiter looking for a tile or tile damage might show us, you know, the bottom of the vehicle is black. It might show us white. By itself, a white tile is not an alarming fact. It does not show us the depth of tile that may have been shaved off. We cannot make a determination conclusively whether that represents a concern or not. The second factor was, even if I had information, I can't do anything about it. I'm really helpless to go out and do any tile repair. And the third factor was, I had done the analysis. The best experts at our disposal concluded that it was a minor problem, not a significant problem. And when you added all that up, there was no need to take pictures to document any evidence, because we believed it to be superficial and it to be a turnaround issue and not a safety issue. And so we didn't take any pictures.
Paul Dandridge with Channel 2 and Channel 9 in Los Angeles. Having moved away from the debris then that hit the orbiter, saying that it was inconsequential, could we move to the wheel well and that breach? What might possibly, if in fact that was the case, have caused that?
I didn't say we had a wheel well breach. All I said was that we had some temperature sensor and pressure sensor indications that we lost, off-scale low, which means they quit working. We did have an indication that on the side of the vehicle, not in the wheel well, on the side of the vehicle, we had a 60-degree rise over 5 minutes. That's not normal. I really have no temperature rise inside of the main gear well at all. All I know is that I lost temperature measurements. All I know is I have routing of wire close by. I know that the left side of the vehicle was getting warmer than the right side. And it would be speculation to say that the main landing gear well is my problem. I don't know that yet. I'm giving you that information. I'm giving you as much information as I have, and that's all I know today. I have no breach. I have no indicator that says the wheel well got hot. All I am doing is putting together different pieces of the puzzle and trying to understand what it means, and I don't yet have the answer.
Chris Heinbaugh with WFAA TV in Dallas. Texas Governor Rick Perry has reportedly told school administrators in 93 counties not to open the schools until all of them have been fully inspected for debris and guaranteed safe. Did this advice come from NASA, and just how much of a threat does this pose to children?
I'm not aware of that report, nor am I aware of any advice that is coming from NASA relative to the debris to the governor. But let me reinforce the fact that pieces of debris can be toxic. And for the safety of the public, the safety of families and children, it is best that you not pick up the debris. It is best that you identify it, locate it, and then call the proper authorities. Something that looks innocent could have become contaminated just because of the event. And we certainly don't want anybody to get harmed because of their zealousness to help us. And so we're trying to get the word out to be careful, call the proper authorities, don't pick it up, let the proper authorities move it and tag it appropriately.
Okay, I'm going to take two more questions here before going to the other centers, so we'll take Miles and then...
A question for Ron from Miles O'Brien at CNN. Ron, what do we know about this specific external tank? Was it a lightweight tank? In other words, a tank that hasn't been used as much of late because super lightweight tanks have been used for the space station. So how much shelf life did it have? And have you had a chance to look at all about and document any of the processes for putting on the foam of this particular tank?
We have really two types of tank in our inventory. We have what we call a lightweight tank and a super lightweight tank. The super lightweight tank was developed in our efforts to improve our performance to gain more cargo lift capability to the station. The lightweight tank is what we flew consistently many years ago. And the one that we flew on STS-107 was one of two that we had in our inventory remaining. There's no concern about the lightweight tank. It's just different material than the super lightweight. It weighs roughly 6,000 to 7,000 more pounds than the super lightweight tank. But structurally and performance-wise, we had used it for many years and had no reason to doubt its capability. Okay. I don't know, Miles, how long that particular tank had been built, sitting in inventory. We can certainly get that. We have that knowledge, and we have one more tank that's sitting in inventory of lightweight nature.
Bruce Nichols, Dallas Morning News for Ron Dittemore. You told us yesterday that the crew routinely got out of their seats to take pictures as the tank separated. Did they tell you what they saw? Were they able to transmit those pictures? Did they know it could be serious? What did they tell you?
We did alert the crew later on that we did have a debris impact from the tank onto the orbiter. We kept them informed of our analysis on the ground, and finally, as we had concluded that it was not going to be anything more than superficial, we alerted the crew to that fact. I don't recall if we had any conversations from the crew to the ground relative to the pictures that they took. Bob, do you recall?
I don't think there were any. Normally the crew would take the pictures and stow that film, mark it, and stow it for early return to Houston upon landing.
Especially given the knowledge that it was superficial and inconsequential, they went on with their business, stored the film, and knew that we were interested in it as soon as they landed. They can't transmit it? No, this is film, not digital.
Okay, let's go to the Kennedy Space Center in Florida now for questions, please.
Marcia Dunn with the Associated Press for Ron. What's your best estimate on the size of the debris that came off the tank during liftoff? Are you 100% it was foam and not ice or some other matter, and any idea on the size of the damaged area where it impacted?
I'm sure we have the relative size to the best of our ability to judge for the debris that shed the tank. And we can get that information for you if you would talk to our public affairs representatives. The impact damage to the vehicle was not determined. We believe that at the velocity that it was shed from the tank and at the incident angle that it hit the bottom of the orbiter, that it did not represent any significance to us from a safety point of view. And we don't believe that there was, from our review of the film, any hardware that came off the tank. We believe it was all the foam insulation.
Pat Duggins for NPR and WMFE. Considering the wreckage and the condition of the wreckage on the ground, how useful is that going to be for your investigation, or are most of the answers going to come from telemetry?
We're hopeful that there are some clues remaining to be found through investigation of the evidence that we gather on the ground. We're hopeful that there are pieces of hardware that we can look at that will help us solve this puzzle. And as in any reconstruction of a catastrophic event, it's going to take some time. We're pulling together the experts in the country that do these types of things, and we are very hopeful that we will find the necessary information that will help us solve why Columbia was destroyed.
This is Chris Kreidler from Florida Today. I realize that the STS-107 astronauts could not have spacewalked underneath the orbiter, but didn't NASA have a procedure that was tested in the late 70s that might have allowed an astronaut to go outside and repair the tiles? Can you discuss that?
Early in the program, we recognized that that if we lost tile or multiple tile, that we didn't have any repair technique, and we tried to develop such a technique. We finally abandoned pursuing that option. We just didn't believe it was feasible at the time. We were also very concerned that as you send a spacewalk crew member over the side of the vehicle and go underneath the vehicle, we are concerned that just the nature of them trying to position themselves in space underneath the vehicle could cause more damage than what we were trying to fix. And so the risk was greater to send a crew over to the side to try to do something that was very hard to do than it was to try to fix whatever problem that we thought was not a significant risk. So we made those trades and finally abandoned the idea of trying to have some tile repair kit or tile repair capability.
Tom Donovan, WPBF, West Palm Beach, for Ron Dittemore. In the history of the shuttle program, have you ever gotten re-entry data, either from the orbiter or on the ground, that shows that any other orbiter came close to or began to have attitude problems similar to the ones for the Columbia that you described earlier?
I wouldn't classify what I described as an attitude problem. I would say that the description I gave you was the flight control system reacting to a drag condition. And we have had conditions in the past where the vehicle sensed an atmospheric layer, difference in density, altitude, and the flight control system would react to it as it came in through the atmosphere. And so those types of things are normal. What's a little bit unusual about this one is that even though it was within the capability of the flight control system to respond to this increased drag, the degree of which the elevons were trying to correct is outside our family of experience. So if you've flown 112 or 113 flights, and this is the first one where the degree of elevon up motion to respond to the drag is outside of your previous database, that's unusual. And that would always trigger a response from our engineering teams to look at that carefully.
Ron, this is Stefano Coldan with the New York Times and Popular Mechanics. During the mission, were there any concerns or requests by the astronaut families to take a better look for any damage caused by the debris during the launch after that was published?
I'm not aware of any request outside the normal engineering teams and normal program management. It would be very unusual for the families to even be involved in such an event. The families in our community and in the astronaut corps have a basic trust in the program, in our management, and our engineering expertise, just as we who manage the program have a great trust in the astronauts that fly and operate the machine. There's a tremendous respect on both sides, and the families would have great confidence and do have great confidence in our ability to do the right thing. As we come into these types of situations, as I accept this position as a manager of the Space Shuttle program, it's my personal commitment to make the decisions that will provide safety to the crew members. It's my personal commitment to never launch or take risk or perform any activity that I believe is unacceptable risk to the crew member. My goal and my objective is to always bring back the astronaut to their family. It's the highest priority I have. That's the trust that they have in me. And I have the trust in them that they will have confidence in our ability.
Strapping into that rocket, going flying in space, we all know what risk we accept. That's an easy risk to accept. The difficult risk to accept is strapping your friends into that rocket and launching them into space. And believe me, none of the decisions that are made are taken lightly. They're taken with the gravest concern.
This is Peter Walston with the Miami Herald. Do you have any indications yet about the state of the crew compartment over the course of that 5 to 7 minute period?
I have no information on the state of the crew compartment. All I know is to the point that we lost communication with the vehicle. There was not a problem that was indicated on the data or in the voice communication from the crew.
Ron, this is Jim Banky, Space.com. Could you elaborate some more on the sensors that are in the wing? For example, when the sensors are failing off, especially temperature sensors, and they just suddenly go to zero, there's no indication, even in a microsecond of data, that there was any temperature rise before those sensors failed, or is it simply an on-off kind of thing?
It's an on-off type of thing. With instrumentation, when you get, if you cut the wire, the actual indication doesn't slowly degrade. It's either on or off. And that's exactly what happens here. And so when you hear us say off-scale low or off-scale high, instrumentation will react that way when it just loses its capability to perform. And so in this case, it was as if someone had cut the wire. It was immediately gone and did not give us any indication of an upward or descending trend. But I did give you some information from other areas that do indicate that there was an elevated heating environment on the left side of the vehicle.
Ron, this is Craig Kovalt with Aviation Week. Given the design of the landing gear doors, is it possible to have a door slightly ajar or a seal slightly unsealed, if you will, and not have a telemetry or cockpit indication of that indication on a door?
I don't believe so. And in fact, as we stow the landing gear on the ground, that's performed before we even mate to the external tank. There's a significant testing that is performed to verify that the doors are seated properly, and we have mechanical rigging that is part of the design that does not allow the door to become unseated. And so I do not believe that to be a problem.
Joanna Rumeliotis, CBC Television. You say with every briefing you become more confident in the information you're putting forward. Do you have a better sense today how long this investigation will take and how long these shuttle missions here at Kennedy Space Center will be delayed?
Of course, I'm searching for that answer just as you are. We're less than 36 hours into this investigation. And so we really cannot be expected to then offer a schedule of when we'll be complete. We can just say that we're going about our business methodically, professionally, with a lot of intensity, and we'll brief you on a regular basis and keep you up to speed on what is occurring.
Ron, Keith Landry, Fox 35 News in Orlando. Given that we've been talking a lot about the tile system and how there have been issues with that for many years, is NASA working on any long-term research to phase out the tile system? Any new technology, say like a stealth flight technology, that might be better?
I wouldn't characterize that we have had tile issues for many years. In fact, we've flown this vehicle for over 20 years, and our tile system of insulation has performed wonderfully. True, we have some repair that we have to do from time to time, but it's a unique design. It's lightweight, and it performs its job extremely well in rejecting the heat. What we have invested over the years is time and energy and money in trying to develop a stronger tile, where a tile has a stronger surface so that when it is hit by debris, it doesn't penetrate the black surface of the tile. We have been successful at doing that in some applications. And you can look at the back of the orbiter today and see some of the improvements in tile over the time frame that we're talking about. An older tile would be damaged during the launch phase. And every flight as it comes back, we would have to repair or replace the tile. The newer tiles on the back end of the vehicle look shiny new, don't require any tender loving care. And so we have made advances in tile. But the application of tile is different. You can't use the same type of tile in every location. It has to be designed for the underside of the vehicle because of its environment. The backside of the vehicle has a different tile design, a different density, a different weight. And so we have difficulty formulating a new tile with the right level of increased toughness or hardness and having it applied to the bottom of the vehicle. We are continuing to investigate whether we can develop a stronger, tougher tile. We're spending money this year to do so. We've been spending money for many years to try to develop this technology. We haven't been successful yet to make an improvement over the existing tile, but we're making progress.
You said earlier that you get twice daily reports from the mishap response team. I'm wondering if they reported to you how much debris has been recovered, and if you could express that in either pounds or perhaps a percentage of the total vehicle that has been recovered.
We have not yet received that type of information from the team. Over the last 24 hours, the team has relocated to Shreveport. The major part of their focus was to get organized, to send teams out, to identify the debris, catalog it, make sure it had the right environmental protection, and start to move the debris to a staging area. Over the coming days and week, we will get more information as to how much debris we have found, how large the pieces are, and we will begin to do that painstakingly laborious task of trying to catalog and piece these things together. And we have the good fortune of having experts from NTSB at our disposal who are used to doing these types of things in their line of work as they investigate airplane crashes, and they are helping us immensely in the same type of task. But up to this time, I don't have any information relative to size and numbers of debris.
Ron, this is Todd Drakowski with WKMG Local 6 in Orlando. You talked earlier about how your team got together and tried to decipher what danger, if anything, from the debris that hit and the damage to the tiles. Can you elaborate a little bit more about what role the crew played on board the shuttle? Was it possible they could have possibly done spacewalks? And looking forward, maybe will there be some provisions made that the crew will actually be able to do on-board inspections of the possible damage in future missions to try to avoid any second guessing or questions about how bad the damage actually is?
See, I mentioned this to most folks yesterday, but we have no capability to inspect the bottom of the vehicle. We have no capability to repair tile damage on the bottom of the vehicle. Even on this particular mission, we did not even have the remote manipulator system, or RMS, to look over the side underneath the bottom of the vehicle. And even if we did, its angle, that its capability to look at the tile and discern damage is very, very limited. So our ability to look at the bottom of the vehicle is extremely limited, and we have no capability to repair. That's all I can say about that.
I'm Stan Grant in Hong Kong. I'd like to welcome all viewers to NewsBiz today. We've been listening to a NASA briefing from the Johnson Space Center in Houston, Texas, about the Space Shuttle Columbia disaster. Ron Dittemore, the shuttle program manager, said, quote, "We are beginning to make progress." He said that a sudden and extreme rise in temperature was reported aboard the craft before it broke apart. Then that was followed by a drag on the left side, which caused the craft to alter its path. The focus of the investigation is on a piece of insulation that could have broken loose not long after takeoff and whether that caused critical damage to the craft. Now, looking at the investigation itself, investigation teams are collecting data and analysing that, also collecting debris and any human remains that may be found as well. The investigation, he said, will look at structure, flight control and also temperature. In the words of Ron Dittemore, it's like piecing together the pieces of a puzzle. We'll take a break on NewsBiz today. All other areas will rejoin existing programs. We'll be back just after this.
Prince Emma, what did you make of the information that's coming out today?
Well, I must say the questions are still going on. I've come out to talk to you. I mean, this is pretty technical stuff. I mean, take note, he said right at the outset that they are gaining ground, but not a lot, that the investigation was fluid. So they're basically telling us what they know, but they're saying things may change. We may even contradict ourselves in a few days' time. I think there were a couple of key points. Firstly, that they say there was not a major problem prior to disaster. And we still have this time, as you mentioned, 07:53 in the morning here. This is still the first indication that they have that something went wrong. Those 4 heat sensors stopped working. And then he focused in on the left wheel, the left landing gear, that the temperature was rising. And they described this as a significant thermal event. So the left-hand side of the plane was increasing in temperature more than the right. And then a few minutes later, they're concerned about this drag to the left, that the crew were aware of this. They were trying to rectify the imbalance through their computer software on the aircraft. And this is when they lost control. So what caused this spacecraft to drag to the left? Suspicion, of course, is falling on these heat-absorbing tiles. Could possibly 1 or 2 have fallen off or several be damaged. This is what I think that the focus is going to be. But as you say, they really don't know. They're just telling us about the new information as they're getting it. Just remember that they're pouring through all this data that they've received that's been transmitted by the second from Columbia down to Mission Control. So they're being quite open and honest, telling us what they know, but they're still not sure what to make of it.
They made it pretty clear, Emma, didn't they, that they're considering going into the wings, as he put it, of the other 3 grounded shuttles to see if a problem with the tiles could, in effect, bring down the shuttle, though they don't believe the loss of one could have done that.
That's right. They spoke quite openly about how tiles have fallen off before in quite particular places, but it wasn't enough to bring disaster. So really, we're not quite sure how many tiles have fallen off, what really went on up there, because remember, the crew weren't able to see the underside of this spacecraft. They didn't know what was going on underneath the craft, so they weren't aware of what they were dealing with. And of course, they pointed out that even if a catastrophic loss of tiles had occurred, there would be nothing that they would be able to do about it. In effect, they would have been doomed. But this is pure speculation. They have no hard answers. It's extremely fluid, and I think the quote of the day is that they are gaining ground, but not a lot.
Emma, just very briefly, they did make it clear, as we're showing on screen now, the debris that hit the left wing on launch, on ascent, was not considered a risk to the flight. But I think many people will be surprised that it wasn't spotted anyway until the day after, when the launch film was reviewed.
Well, I think in their defense that we're talking about a very small piece of material, and this occurred 80 seconds after takeoff, and that they only spotted it when they started to play back all the video that was recorded from takeoff. And as you say, they had a hefty discussion about it, but they decided, on balance, that this was inconsequential.
Emma, thank you very much indeed. That's just about it from the BBC World Newsroom for now. We'll have more international news at the top of the hour. Just a reminder, you can log on to bbcnews.com for many more details.
Tonight, the day after the disaster, we mourn and remember the 7 heroes from the Shuttle Columbia. And we keep asking why. Joining me in this hour, Hugh Downs, former 2020 co-anchor who covered the space program for ABC. From their home in Virginia, Paul and Dorothy Brown, parents of Columbia mission specialist David Brown. At the Johnson Space Center in Houston, CBS News correspondent Bill Harwood. In Washington, NASA Associate Administrator Bill Reedy, a former astronaut, now day-to-day manager for space shuttle flights. In Atlanta, Randy Avera, 14 years a NASA engineer. He investigated the Challenger crash and was at the Columbia launch. In Washington, John Logsdon, director of the Space Policy Institute. And with some insight on healing, in San Antonio, Texas, Max Lucado, minister at the Oak Hills Church of Christ. And in Houston, Reverend David Fannin, senior pastor at Nassau Bay Baptist Church, right across from the Johnson Space Center. All next on a special edition of Larry King Weekend. Hugh Downs is going to serve as the co-host tonight. He'll be firing questions as our guest as well. Not that he needs credentials, but you as chairman of the Board of Governors of the National Space Society. Among the members are Arthur C. Clarke and Tom Hanks and Tom Cruise. He's covered launches for NBC and ABC of several Apollo missions and shuttle missions, and a former advisor to NASA as well. With us at the Johnson Space Center in Houston is Bill Harwood of CBS News. He writes, edits, and maintains CBS News Space Place on the web. Been a journalist covering NASA for 20 years. Bill Reedy is a veteran astronaut. He's in Washington. He's flown on 3 space flights. An associate NASA administrator for Office of Space Flight. What, Bill Reedy, we'll start with you. What do we definitely know?
Well, at this point, you realize that it's very close to the event. And I'd like first to start out by saying I'm expressing NASA's deepest sympathies to the Browns, recognizing that just this horrible, horrible tragedy. We will find out what happened, we'll get to the bottom of it, and we'll fix it, and then we'll get back to returning to flight. But what we know at this point, let me tell you where we have been. We've deployed teams in the field. They're on station right now. They're searching for any little clue we positively can identify as part of the wreckage, understanding that it was spread out over quite a distance. And we've had tremendous cooperation across the federal government, state and local agencies, FEMA, the EPA, and now we even have National Guard on scene helping us identify wreckage and collect it. Private citizens have also pitched in, and I'd like to commend them for having identified the pieces of wreckage to the local authorities so that we can make sure that we tag them, locate them, because every little piece of the puzzle will help us unravel what happened yesterday.
Gotcha. Bill Harwood, how cooperative is NASA being repertorially?
You know, it's really been striking. I covered the Challenger accident back in 1986, and a policy of strict no comment was implemented in the wake of that disaster. And I have to tell you, Larry, the policy NASA's implemented in the wake of Columbia's loss, tragic as it was, is one of remarkable openness. They really shared the data that they have to this point with us and through us to the public. And I have to say, I think it's a very positive step. It reassures the public that NASA's on the right track. It lets them follow along in the investigation a little bit, because I think that's part of this, Larry. You know, the shuttle, the space program, is really part of America's image of itself. And when there's something bad like this happens, to be able to participate in it, even from a distance, to follow and find out what went wrong with this program is a valuable thing. And they've been remarkably open. I've been very impressed.
Let me ask what you think, and I could ask Bill Reedy also. What do you think? Is there any kind of on cause, anything that's definitely ruled out, like design flaw, pilot error, anything like that, that is not the case?
That would be for both of you. We'll start with Bill Reedy and then Bill Harwood. Bill?
No, I don't think I'm sorry, is it to me or to Bill Reedy, Larry? I'm sorry.
Bill Reedy first and then Bill Harwood.
Well, thank you. First of all, I think one of the things that we can rule out is pilot error. You know, clearly we won't rule out anything else because we're collecting all the evidence and sifting through it. But I can say right now that the crew was ultra professional, highly trained. There was no evidence of anything at all during the downlink that would indicate that there was any kind of crew involvement in this incident. But we will not rule out anything otherwise in terms of investigating the evidence that we have. This is a public space program. It's always been public. We owe it to the public to disclose whatever it is that we have. To that end, we're establishing twice-a-day press briefings, one here at headquarters and one down at the Johnson Space Center each day. And whatever it is that we uncover, we will disclose and share with the media. We want to make sure that we're leaning forward on this, making sure that the public trust that has been invested in us is well placed.
Do you have a rough idea of a timetable for getting this, knowing exactly what took place?
Well, obviously we're trying to build what we call the fault tree in the business, and that is try and figure out all the possible things that might have gone wrong, and then what we do is work backwards and by process of elimination rule out those things that could not have been the causal factor. We'll take however long it takes to get to the bottom of this, to identify
Bill Harwood,
the problem.
From a reporting standpoint, how difficult a story is this?
Well, it's always tough, Larry, when you see a human tragedy of this magnitude and scale that affects something as big as a space program. It's difficult to cover in that, as you're aware, and what Mr. Reedy is talking about, the data comes in slowly. That's of necessity. I completely agree with him that in the early stages of an investigation like this, it's an extraordinarily complex picture. You know, people lose sight of the complexity of the space shuttle. Just because it's flown a lot doesn't mean it's something that's simple. There's hundreds and hundreds of data points that come down in real time. They have to go back through that, as he said, and it just takes time. You know, reporters obviously are never as patient as other people might want us to be, but that's just the nature of this business, and I think it's going to take a little while to fully get to the bottom of it, and no one wants to come up with a false conclusion that turns out not to be true later.
Bill Reedy, you've flown 3 missions. Were you worried about re-entry?
Well, there isn't anything we can take for granted in spaceflight. There's tremendous risk still involved in exploring space, and I think everyone that's professionally involved in this business knows that. I think the public, though, perhaps, because we have been so successful for so long since Challenger, because we have put in so many safety upgrades into the vehicle, because we have been so successful building the International Space Station, servicing the Hubble, and doing all those marvelous things that we do and making them look easy, has probably led the public to the conclusion that this is risk-free, and it's far from it. This is every bit as risky as doing experimental test flying like I used to do in the United States Navy.
Yeah, one of the things I've wondered, and I haven't heard it commented on recently, if the crew had known in advance that re-entry was going to be impossible, would it have been at all possible to make it to the space station? Even if they weren't trained in docking, I would imagine something of that could have been accomplished. Or would that have not been an option?
Well, that's an interesting thought. First of all, we're not even sure what has happened at this point, so it's a hypothetical, but the orbits were vastly different. The orbit that this particular flight was in was inclined at 40 degrees to the equator. The space station flies at 51.6, so they're not even coincident in terms of orbit. So it really, and it also didn't have a docking mechanism on this particular flight, so it really was not a possibility. An academic situation and hypothetical, too, in that we really don't know what's happened at this point.
Bill Reedy, thanks for joining us. We'll be calling on you again. Bill Harwood will remain with us, and we'll be joined by Randy Avera and John Logston. And then we'll meet the Browns' parents who lost their son in this tragedy yesterday. We'll be right back. Welcome back to this special edition of Larry King Weekend. Hugh Downs, the veteran journalist, is co-hosting with us for tonight. And joining us now from Atlanta is Randy Avera, who spent 14 years as a NASA engineer. He helped investigate the Challenger disaster, wrote a book about it called The Truth About the Challenger. Bill Harwood of CBS News remains with us at the Johnson Space Center in Houston. And John Logston joins us. He's doctor, is a PhD, and a director of the Space Policy Institute at George Washington University. We do round-robin questioning here, and we'll start with Randy. Why is debris important?
Well, the debris holds the record of the physical forces and chemistry that occurred to the vehicle during the event that resulted in the catastrophic crash. And it's important to get that debris as early as possible so that mechanical and chemical analysis and other tests can be conducted in order to literally unfold those secrets from those components and combine that with other data to put the entire investigation in order.
Bill Harwood, what's the latest information on the remains of body parts?
That's proceeding, as you can imagine, Larry. They have said up front they're not going to discuss that out of deference to the family members. Bob Cabana, the Flight Crew Operations Directorate Chairman down here at the Johnson Space Center, said earlier today at a news conference that remains from all 7 astronauts had been found. They later retracted that and said he misspoke. So at this point, that process obviously continues, but for the same reasons, they're not going to discuss that in any detail at all.
Mr. Logston, Dr. Logston, what about the space program? Some think it's lost its visionary allure. It's not the magic it once was. We don't even know when they're flying anymore. And now it might be in trouble fiscally. What do you think?
Well, I think that this is an opportunity to think through why the United States is engaged in human spaceflight. I think there should be the kind of discussion we're having tonight, and the media, the electronic and print media, the Congress, the White House, all should engage in thinking through, are the benefits of this worth the risk, worth the cost? I think that process will revalidate the program and say we must move forward, and it's in the country's interest to do that.
I'm sure you heard the president make a statement that the space program would continue. To my mind, the worst thing we could do in failing to honor the memory of these people would be to cut back on the space program. It certainly would not be what they would want.
Randy, do you share that view?
We definitely are a human race on this planet, and we are by very nature explorers. I work with some of the astronomers who are using the Hubble telescope, the Chandra X-ray telescope, and are designers for what is the new James Webb Space Telescope. And let me tell you that you can just go out to a NASA or a Hubble Space Telescope site and see some of the most fascinating science that's ever been shown in the history of the world. For example, we know where 85 Jupiter-type planets are located, and we believe that just within the orbits of those planets, there will be planets like Mercury and Earth, and that's what the James Webb Space Telescope's looking at. But in order to do the great science, in what I have written, Title 42, the Public Health and Welfare Codes, where the NASA Charter has resided for the past 45 years, it's time to overhaul and revise that charter. We talk about the future of space exploration. Well, we can't even begin to chart that course until we totally address what the charter is the charter balanced for what we're planning to do as a nation and with our international partners.
Do you think the United States will maintain its lead in space activities?
Well, if I have anything to do it with it and the people and the contractors and academia and the NASA programs that I've been fortunate to work in, I can tell you people are highly motivated, very skilled, highly motivated. They don't punch a time clock. They go to work to be a part of history.
Bill Harwood, do you feel that the public had lost its allure for this program?
I think the International Space Station, Larry, by its very nature, with the esoteric research they do, it can never have the kind of public appeal that a program like Apollo, for example, going to the moon or even going to Mars, something like that's going to have to the average person in the street. It's very hard to understand. It's not the kind of science that lends itself to easy explanation, and so it's a little bit tougher sell. That, plus the enormous price tag of all of this. I wanted to go back to what John Logston was saying. I think there is widespread support for space travel in this country. Polls consistently show that. I don't know that it's not a legitimate question at a time like this to look at the shuttle in a lot of detail, the cost, the technology involved, upgrades, et cetera, and to reconsider the whole issue of should you replace the vehicle with something that's either safer or less expensive to operate. You know, right now the shuttle is so expensive, it's old technology. Admittedly, it's a fantastic flying machine. It's a marvelous statement of that technology. But it is 30 years old, and it's cost a lot of money to launch it. And I think that you cannot separate the cost of space travel when you talk about what the public wants or doesn't want, because that ultimately becomes a political statement, and it's enormously expensive.
John, what do you say to that?
Well, it would be nice if on the shelf there was the technology that we could put a little money against and replace the shuttle, but that just isn't the case. We've invested too little in advanced space transportation technology, so we're at a position where the shuttle is the best we could do right now. NASA thought this through, Sean O'Keefe and his team last year, and decided to push further into the future the next generation shuttle replacement and invest in making the shuttle as safe as possible. I think it, you know, in principle it'd be great to have something more modern. In practice, we have to learn what caused this accident, fix the shuttle, and fly it at least for another 10 or 15 years.
Randy, a football coach once told me he learned more after a loss than after a win. Do you learn more after something like this?
Well, what I call in my book the NASA method, which is what I grew up on after I graduated Georgia Tech. NASA trained me by the evolution from actually before the Mercury days, when it was the National Aerospace Council on Aeronautics, the NACA organization. And in 1958, when the NASA organization was chartered by NASA, through the years, we've developed what I call the NASA method of design, development, testing, and a very, very important part, quality control. NASA, for example, during the Apollo program, has been the leader in this area, and the United States has shared that with the rest of the world, and the world is coming along and doing marvelous work in the aerospace fields and space exploration. There are people all around the world doing all kinds of science in orbit, and let's not forget the great science that's happening on the Earth's surface that supplements the science done in orbit.
Yeah. Thank you, Randy Avera, John Loxton, and Bill Harwood. Thanks for joining us. We'll be calling upon you again as this story unravels. When we come back, we're going to be talking with the parents of Mr. Brown, who passed away yesterday. Fantastic individual. And when we come back after the Browns, we'll meet two religious leaders, and we'll include your phone calls for them. We'll be right back.
The same Creator who names the stars also knows the names of the 7 souls we mourn today. The crew of the Shuttle Columbia did not return safely to Earth, yet we can pray that all are safely home.
Welcome back to more of Larry King Live with my co-host tonight, the estimable Hugh Downs. Joining us now from Washington, Virginia, are Paul and Dorothy Brown. They're the parents of the late Columbia Shuttle astronaut, David Brown. David was extraordinary in that he was a medical doctor and a pilot and an astronaut. What came first, Paul? Was he first a doctor?
Yes, he was.
Do you know?
Then
He was a pilot.
Go ahead.
I mean, do you know what made him? Give me the order he went from doctor to pilot to astronaut.
All right. After William and Mary, he went to Eastern Virginia Med School. One of his professors had been in the Navy, and Dave talked to him about flying. With that encouragement, he went to the Navy and to Pensacola, where he learned to fly and land a fighter plane on a carrier deck at night. That was the beginning of it.
Dorothy, when did he want to become an astronaut?
Well, I think it was when he went into the Navy and began flying. He loved to fly. And I think that's when he began to dare to dream of being an astronaut.
The fact that he could do...
And of course he...
Go ahead.
Yes.
Go ahead.
That he could soar and fly.
Mm-hmm. The fact that he was able to wear more than one hat so easily, because I'm sure he was dedicated to medicine, which he went into, and yet
yes, he
wanted to be an astronaut and became one.
Well, planned to practice family practice in medicine, but when the flying bug bit him, he just couldn't resist.
Paul, how did you learn?
Astronaut.
How did you learn, Paul, of his of the occurrence?
We were watching TV at home and heard that they'd lost communication. We then got a call from Ann Nicholas, who is chief engineer in Canaveral for the company that applies the tiles. Ann said they've lost contact. Dot asked her, "What does that mean?" She said, "I'm afraid it's serious." She then had to cut off the connection, but we knew it was bad, and soon thereafter we saw the fragments coming through the sky from a Texas TV station. It was rough.
Oh my God! Yeah. How did you handle it, Dorothy?
Well, we were just stunned, in shock. Disbelief was more. And then, as the news commentator said, it has to be the shuttle because pieces were falling through the sky, and we just. I can't describe it.
It was just not believable for any of us.
Just not believable.
Let me ask both of you, what do you think David would want the nation to do now about the space program?
Oh, he would want us to go on. He said the last time I saw Dave in Canaveral, just before he was to, the shuttle was to launch, I said to him, "Dave, I'll be thinking of you every minute." And he gave me a great big kiss. And I know that he wants this program to continue.
His brother Doug had asked him, "Dave, what if you die in space?" He said, "NASA will go on. It has to go on." Yeah. And that's what Don and I want to say.
Paul,
this program, we are... Go ahead.
Did you fear, Paul, for him in space? Did you have worries that...
No.
No, you did not?
We knew...
Concerned, but
we knew he knew the risks, and it's just part of the process.
That he was aware of the risks.
You have to take that chance.
And
he wanted to be an astronaut. Yeah.
He certainly was doing what he wanted to do, and I think that's important.
That's right.
Did he send you emails back from the shuttle?
Yes. Yes, he did.
Yes, we did.
Yes, he did.
What
they
was he
say at the bottom, not for release to the media, but there's some bits in there.
Oh, go ahead, release them.
More.
What did he tell you?
Well, I'd have to read them, but he said what a wonderful thing it was to fly over the Earth and to see well, I can't remember it all, but the continents and the Red Sea and the Great Lakes, and he flew over the East Coast looking very hard down on the coast of Virginia looking for our house, and he couldn't find us in the mountain. We're in a mountainous area with many trees, and he couldn't find us.
At that height,
But
that
he
might have
was
been difficult.
Yes.
He,
Right.
as a mission specialist, he had a reputation as a team player. Did he talk much to you about his other teammates on that crew?
Oh, he said in his last email from space that we, after 2.5 years together, we have become a family, and we are very close, all of his fellow astronauts. And we sensed that NASA had a wonderful dinner for the astronauts and their families a couple of nights before the launch. And we saw that, how close they were and how compatible they were.
Paul, did you and Dorothy go to the launch?
Yes, we did.
Yes, we did.
I'm in a wheelchair, but we got a young friend. We engaged him to drive us down, and he did a good job, and we got there.
Do you remember the last? Well, let me take a break and come right back. I want to find out what you said to David before he went up. We're talking with Paul and Dorothy Brown. I'm with Hugh Downs on this edition of Larry King Live, and we'll be back with the Browns from their home in Washington, Virginia, right after this. With Paul and Dorothy Brown. They'll be attending the memorial service along with the president and many others on Tuesday in Houston. Dorothy was telling us during the break that you spoke to at that dinner to the Israeli astronaut, and what did he tell you?
and he said he wanted to tell me how much he had learned from David. That, of course, Dave was a medical doctor, and he said they had become very close friends. And he was just the nicest man you'd ever want to meet. We met his father, who had come from Israel for the dinner, and Paul talked to his father more than I did.
His father was a Holocaust survivor, Paul.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
And in Dave's email, he said that Elon had brought a letter from a friend who was a Holocaust survivor, whose 7-year-old daughter did not survive the Holocaust. Dave's remark was,
I cannot believe such horrible acts could be committed on our planet Earth. And he was, it went on, I can't remember.
Paul, how do you
shocked.
how do you cope with the most difficult of things? It's unnatural. Parents don't outlive their children. How are you coping with
That's
this?
right.
How are you coping?
by talking to people, by trying to get Dave's message out that the program must go on, by talking to you. You're helping to spread the word. He believed in this, and the mission, scientifically, I think, was pretty successful. Most of it was downloaded, so it's captured on Earth. So we have to take satisfaction in that.
You?
A lot of astronauts who have seen the majestic wheeling of the Earth as they're in orbit develop a perspective that the rest of us probably don't have. Did you sense that in any of his messages to you while he was in orbit?
Well, in his last message, he said, the Earth is such a beautiful place that if I had to choose between the Earth and space, I would choose the Earth.
Interesting. Yeah. That's really great. What special memories do you have of him as a child? He joined the circus, didn't he?
Oh, yes. He joined everything. Well, when he was little, he loved to chase butterflies, anything that flew, fireflies, butterflies, whatever. Dave was always floating on a star, dreaming up a new adventure.
I have to ask you a
Didn't
question
surprise me.
if I can. Being a pilot, I'd be interested, since David flew A6s and T-38s and the F-18 Hornet, and did he have a favorite aircraft at the time that he was flying all these things, or do you know?
He liked them all.
He did.
But he owned a little...
He owned a little...
Bonanza.
A Bonanza.
Much brought up to date. So he'd fly up here from Houston in about 7 hours and come in about 15 miles away. He liked that.
He also owned a little tail dragger, primitive.
Oh, did he?
Tail dragger.
What's a tail
dragger?
dragger?
Tail dragger is doesn't have tricycle landing gear. It just the old biplanes were all tail dragger. Was it a biplane?
Yes, and you fly in. Well, you fly in tandem.
Monoplane.
Monoplane.
And he lived in a suburb of Houston, and his address was Airline Drive, and he had a little hangar. I should say he had a little house with a hangar. All the people on this drive had that runway, and they all had hangars and planes.
Runway behind the houses.
When do you head for Houston? Tomorrow?
Tomorrow.
We think it's tomorrow.
NASA is arranging our transportation.
It's going to be tough for you. The President and Laura Bush will be there.
Yes.
And
yes.
all the other relatives. I guess there will be some help in being together.
Yeah.
Well, our heart goes out to the other families. Our son David had not married, so he's not leaving dependent children or young wives. Or.
Paul, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, I really do. I just hung up the phone from talking to Ann Nicklaus at Canaveral. She's an engineer for a private company in charge of putting the tiles on the plane. Ann said Dave, who had talked to her a lot, she brought her up here twice, said, Ann, if ever there's a disaster in space, it'll be because somebody committed an error. When it's all over and they determine whose error it was, I want you to hunt them up, find them, and tell them that I absolutely harbor no ill feeling, because mistakes are going to happen.
That's
That's the kind of a guy he was.
Yeah, that's profound.
Boy, oh boy, you had some son.
We certainly did.
We
yeah.
think so.
Thank you both very much.
Fine,
We'll
man.
see you again on Tuesday. Thank you, Paul.
Fine.
Thank you, Dorothy.
Right. Good night.
Paul and Dorothy Brown, the parents of Columbia Shuttle astronaut, the late David Brown, from their home in Washington, Virginia. You and I will be back with more guests right after this. Quick housekeeping note, Elizabeth Taylor's our guest tomorrow night. Tuesday night, Laura Bush was scheduled to be the guest. That was the announcement we were going to make today. She will instead be in Houston with her husband. So we're going to show, the show Tuesday night will deal with the memorial services held earlier that day. Hugh Downs remains with me. Joining us in San Antonio is Max Lucado, best-selling Christian author of A Love Worth Giving and Traveling Light, senior minister of the Oak Hills Church of Christ in San Antonio. And in Houston is Reverend David Fannin, senior pastor of the Nassau Bay Baptist Church. The congregation includes many in the Nassau community. Before I ask questions of our, hopefully those who can give us some spiritual help here, what we didn't ask you has been our co-host here. I didn't ask him anything. What's your overview of this whole situation?
Well, I've been pleased to see something of a consensus that the space program ought to continue. It would probably the worst thing we could do would be to dishonor the memory of these people that lost their lives by cutting back on it or talking about cutting it out. And I know that's the way they feel about it. And I could wish that that we in America had, maybe humanity generally, had a better attitude toward what space has done for us already and what it will do. An example of that is if somebody says, I hear somebody say something like, I talked to so-and-so in Geneva, and he sounded like he was right in the next room. Isn't the telephone wonderful? What they ought to say is, isn't the satellite wonderful? That's what makes that possible. Plus an awful lot of medical advances and the whole cyber world.
You're saying it's worth the expense.
It is more than worth the expense.
Max Lucado, how do you explain this to someone? How do you keep faith when something like this happens to seven obviously wonderful? Why do the good die young? Why do bad things happen to good people? How do you explain that?
Well, those questions, will go on, especially for these close family members very close to these astronauts for quite some time. I think, first of all, we have to give ourselves permission to ask these tough questions. From what I understand, God never resists the honest and genuine seeker. I think we have to give ourselves time. Grief is like a roller coaster. Sometimes we feel like we've made progress. Sometimes we feel like we're actually going downhill. But then we look up and there's a tunnel we're going through. My heart really goes out to these family members. I might encourage them to look for reasons, first of all, to be grateful. Gratitude is a great healer. And there are many reasons to be heavy-hearted, but there are also many reasons to stand in awe of these phenomenal lives, 7 lives, who probably lived more in their 40-plus years. I think the average age is about 45 or 46. Lived more in their years than many of us do in 70 or 80. There's a lot to be thankful for here. And I think a second thing that I would encourage people in these kind of crises to do is to trust the kindness of God. He's too wise to make mistakes, and he's too kind to be cruel. When we can't trace his hand, we trust his heart and know that God is watching out.
Reverend Fannin, were any of these 7 in your congregation?
No, they were not.
But many astronauts are, right?
And that's correct. We have a number of folks, a large majority of our congregation that does work in and around NASA, some actually working with NASA, some working with contractors and subcontractors. Many of our folks knew these astronauts personally, knew them very well, and they have a deep sense of loss and of mourning.
Before you ask your question, did you do a service today?
Yes, we did.
Were astronauts present?
No, the one astronaut who's really active in our church, Dave Leetsma, has just been in the hospital recently with some heart problems, and he was not there this morning, but a large number of the other folks who work at NASA were in our service today.
How do you account for the fact that a number of astronauts have been religious? And I would imagine, a higher percentage than other scientists. Can you account for that?
Well, I think part of the reality is when you begin to deal with real science, looking at God's creation, it's pretty hard to look at that and not come to a greater sense of your Creator and the fact that indeed it is a life of faith, trusting in the God who made all of this, that He knew exactly what He was doing. You know, when they fly in space, they're trusting in the laws that He established when He laid down the foundations of the world.
Max, what do you say to the children of astronauts? How do you explain death to an 8-year-old?
I think that what we have to help, especially children, see is that in God's eyes, death is not a tragedy. You know, in Scripture, death is referred to as sleep. And helping children understand that this is God's time to call one of His children upstairs to rest, I think it's a very fair analogy. And then the promise that you'll see him or see her can bring hope and encouragement to children.
You share that view, Reverend Fannin? What would you say to a child?
Absolutely. And one of the things I try to challenge our church today is to understand that God never makes mistakes. That He is a loving, caring Father whose grace is always sufficient to meet us in our times of need, that we might not always get the answers to the questions that we would ask, but they can always continue to trust in God to meet them in the point of their deepest need. One of the things I tried to share with my church today, that great faith really is forged in the furnace of tragic situations, and that there are those times in life when, by faith, God allows us to escape, but there are also those times that by faith we have to endure. And it's only that faith that enables us to be able to do that in a very real way.
You don't ever doubt it, Max Lucado? You don't ever doubt an occurrence like this doesn't cause you to doubt your faith?
Well, you know, crisis is the consequence of unmet expectations. We expect astronauts to come home, and when they don't, we're disappointed. It's our expectations that are unmet, though. Crises force us to recalibrate who's in charge of the world and acknowledge that God is in charge. In an hour like this, for example, at a memorial service or at a funeral, I'll often turn to the 57th chapter of Isaiah, where the prophet says that good people are taken away and people don't always understand, but that the righteous is taken away from evil. God in His sovereignty could have been taking His servants at the right time to save them from a future disaster. Again, we go back and trust the kindness of God here.
Yeah.
I think that's what's essential.
Let me get a break and come back with our remaining moments with Max Lucado and Reverend David Fannin and Hugh Downs on this edition of, a special edition of Larry King Weekend. Don't go away. We're back with Max Lucado and Reverend David Fannin and Hugh Downs. By the way, we received a ton of calls for the Browns. We didn't take calls for the Browns tonight, expressing their condolences, but I know they'd like to know how many people share their grief. And Hugh Downs has a comment and a question for Max and David.
Yeah, Max, we brought up the subject of grief because no matter how deep your faith, you do grieve when you lose somebody. And I sensed something at this tragedy. I did not know personally any of these astronauts, but I felt a personal sense of grief at this tragedy that happened yesterday. I'm wondering if I'm unique or if a higher percentage of Americans who didn't know them personally have the same feeling. What would be your take on that?
I think that's a great point. I was driving today to get here on time. I had to really race across Texas. I was 4 hours north of San Antonio, and everywhere I drove, Hugh, there were flags flying half-staff. This is something that I think has touched Americans all over, and I was wondering why. Perhaps it's because we're hearing rumblings of war. Perhaps it's so close on the edge of the 9/11 disaster. But I think part of it is that we have our dreams, we have aspirations, and astronauts embody those dreams. And when something like this happens, we fear that maybe the best in us is in jeopardy. But I think, you know, to again what Mr. and Mrs. Brown said, they would encourage us to press on and to use this as a stepping stone of resolve to press forward and not lose hope.
Let's take a call. Calgary, Alberta, Canada. Hello.
Hello. I'd like to ask a question for Reverend Bannon.
Sure.
I'm from Canada, and will there be a public memorial that will be televised so that all of us can grieve together?
Reverend Fannin, what do you know is going to happen on Tuesday?
Well, the plans are still in flux, as I understand it, but there is going to be a memorial service on Tuesday. I'm not sure that I could give you all of the details on that at this particular time.
I think there'll be a major memorial service. The President and First Lady will be attending. All the families of the astronauts who died will be there, and it'll be covered by CNN, of course, and other networks, yes. I'm sure, but I know we'll be covering it. And we're going to do a follow-up show to that memorial on Tuesday night. Do you think there's some place now, Reverend Fannin? You think these 7 people are somewhere?
Absolutely. The Bible talks about the fact that this life is not all there is. That there is a life for those who have a relationship with God, a place called heaven. I only knew of the spiritual condition of 2 of the astronauts from members of my church who are very active in one of our local Christian churches here. But I cannot speak with any certainty or sincerity about the others because I just didn't know and didn't know anybody who knew them. You know, a few moments ago you asked a question about faith and doubt. And over the years I've really discovered that if you have no reason to doubt, you really have no reason to have faith. That it's really not faith that we seek to have in the place of our doubts, but rather it's faith in the face of our doubts that enables us to be able to carry on and be and live the kind of life that God intends for us to live.
It's a little like the analogy of fear and courage, because true courage is not fearless. That's idiotic to be fearless. But real courage is to be afraid and go ahead and do what you
well
must do.
Said. Cincinnati, hello.
Hi, how are you?
Fine.
Well, you know, I am so hurt of the disaster that happened, and we never questioned God why for 16 minutes that these people couldn't live longer what happened in 16 days.
Yeah, why didn't he prevent it, Max?
Well, again, I don't know if we're privy to God's understanding. Scripture teaches us that as far as the heavens are above the earth, God's understanding is above ours. We do know this. We do know that their lives were phenomenally valuable to society, and that they made contributions far beyond what many people make who live much longer than they. We do know that God in His timing, even before we're born, knows how many days we're going to live. Again, crisis is the consequence of unmet expectations. But from His perspective, I believe that the plan is continuing as it should. We can benefit from this. We can be reminded of the frailty of our own lives, and we can give thanks to God for the time that we do have.
Thank you both very much. We have only a minute left. One more caller. Greenville, South Carolina. Hello.
Yes, my question is for Mr. Downs.
Okay.
How long do you think the Space Shuttle program, not the space program, but the Space Shuttle program is going to continue?
30 seconds.
An opinion is easy to give. I agree with the NASA engineer who was on earlier, who said probably another 10, 15 years, maybe with some modifications. But eventually, I think there'll be tourism in space. There'll be cheaper means of getting out of the gravity well of the Earth's surface, and it'll move on just as aviation has, I believe.
Thank you, Hugh Downs. Thanks for sharing the podium tonight.
Thank you.
And thank you, Max Lucado in San Antonio and Reverend David Fannin in Houston for joining us on this tough evening. We'll take a break and come back and tell you about tomorrow night, what's planned ahead, and intro the show that's coming after this one. This is a special edition of Larry King Weekend. We'll be right back.
Gedenken und Trauern. Am NASA-Zentrum in Texas und gestern in vielen Gottesdiensten überall in Amerika. Auch in der Kirche, deren Gemeinde der Kommandant des Unglücksfluges angehört hatte. Die Weltraummission wird weitergehen. Der Tod der Astronauten soll nicht umsonst gewesen sein. Eine Botschaft auf der Suche nach Trost. Doch davor steht die Ursachenforschung. Ein Großaufgebot an Helfern sucht nach den Wrackteilen. Immer mehr werden gefunden, gesichtet und den Behörden gemeldet. Auf keinen Fall etwas anfassen, das gilt auch für die Suchtrupps. Es könnte giftig, sogar radioaktiv sein. Ob die Überreste, wenn sie denn zusammengetragen sind, tatsächlich Aufschlüsse über die Ursache der Katastrophe geben können, ist bloß eine Hoffnung. Inzwischen sind viele Stellen markiert, an denen menschliche Überreste gefunden wurden. Sie sind geborgen und so weit identifiziert, dass man jetzt glaubt, allen Toten ein Begräbnis geben zu können. Auf einer Luftwaffenbasis in Louisiana werden die Trümmer der Columbia untersucht werden. Von der Flugdatenauswertung gab es gestern Abend auf der letzten NASA-Pressekonferenz noch nichts Konkretes zu berichten. Wir haben einen Drall nach links festgestellt. Es kann daran gelegen haben, dass Hitzekacheln beschädigt waren oder fehlten. Wir sind nicht sicher. In Russland startete gestern, unbemannt, eine Versorgungsrakete für die internationale Raumstation. Deren Besatzung wird laufend über die Unglücksuntersuchungen unterrichtet.
Eine Spur führt auf alle Fälle zum Start zurück vor 18 Tagen, als der Shuttle startete. Da ist nämlich wenige Sekunden nach dem Start ist Teil der Isolation am Außentank abgebrochen. Und das könnte dazu geführt haben, dass die Kacheln des Hitzeschildes beschädigt worden sind. Die NASA hat gestern erklärt, dass das damals untersucht worden ist, also unmittelbar nach dem Start. Aber man empfand das als nicht so wichtig, hat das also weiterlaufen lassen wie geplant. Und jetzt heißt es aber, dass unmittelbar vor der Katastrophe die Temperatur in der Raumfähre extrem in die Höhe gestiegen ist. Also innerhalb von 5 Minuten um ganze 32 Grad. Das löste dann wiederum andere Probleme aus. Und all das könnte mit diesen Hitzeschutzkacheln zu tun haben. Aber ich sage ganz bewusst könnte, weil ein Resultat, darauf warten wir wahrscheinlich noch Wochen.
Versuchen nun durch Genanalysen die Fundstücke zuzuordnen. Bis jetzt ist noch nicht klar, ob es von allen 7 Toten schon sterbliche Überreste gibt. Für Helfer und Angehörige eine schreckliche Situation.
Hier am Johnson Space Center zeigen die Menschen offen ihre tiefe Trauer um die 7 verunglückten Astronauten. Die Blumen zum Andenken an die Toten liegen oft nur wenige Meter entfernt von den Trümmerteilen des Shuttle. Und immer wieder finden die Suchmannschaften Leichenteile, die jetzt in mühevoller Kleinarbeit per Genanalyse den Verunglückten zugeordnet werden müssen. Es ist eine grausige Aufgabe, doch die Angehörigen wollen Gewissheit. Rona Ramon war eigentlich nach Texas gekommen, um den Triumph ihres Mannes als erster Israeli im All zu feiern. Jetzt bleiben ihr nur noch die Erinnerungen. Er war ein sehr optimistischer Mensch und er hatte keine Angst. Und genau das ist der letzte Eindruck, den wir von ihm haben. Nach dem Absturz der Raumfähre hat die NASA alle weiteren Shuttleflüge vorerst abgesagt. Erst muss die Ursache für das Unglück gefunden werden. Sicher ist bisher nur, dass Fehler oder Schäden an der linken Seite der Raumfähre zu dem Unglück geführt haben. Aufschluss, warum das Shuttle abstürzte, können jetzt vor allem die gefundenen Wrackteile geben.
Unglaublich, erste Wrackteile werden jetzt schon im Internet zum Verkauf angeboten, obwohl dies streng verboten und gefährlich ist. Heute Morgen also noch unklar, was führte wirklich zur Katastrophe. Waren es Schäden am Hitzeschild? Unser Luft- und Raumfahrtexperte Ralf Benke hat den letzten Flug der Columbia und den Absturz einmal rekonstruiert.
16. Januar, 16:39 Uhr. Das Space Shuttle Columbia startet von Florida aus zu seinem verhängnisvollen letzten Flug. An Bord 7 Astronauten, darunter Shuttle Commander Rick Husband, ein israelischer Astronaut und 2 Frauen. Für 4 von ihnen ist es der erste Trip ins All. 80 Sekunden nach dem Abheben geschieht dann etwas Unplanmäßiges. Wie diese Bilder zeigen, lösen sich Eispartikel von einem kalten Teil des Treibstofftanks und Isolierstücke und prallen gegen die linke Tragfläche. Dennoch erreicht das Shuttle Minuten später seine Umlaufbahn. Es scheint intakt zu sein, soweit die Crew das feststellen kann. 9 Tage später, am 25. Januar, 21:10 Uhr, Live-Interview mit den Astronauten. Zwei Teams arbeiten in den folgenden Tagen rund um die Uhr an 80 Experimenten zur Erforschung der Schwerelosigkeit. Dann meldet sich Astronautin Laurel Clark noch einmal kurz vor der Rückkehr.
We're getting ready for a big day up here. Had a great time on orbit and really excited to come back home.
1. Februar, 14:15 Uhr. Die Bremsraketen des Shuttles haben gezündet. Die Piloten richten es für den bevorstehenden Wiedereintritt in die Atmosphäre aus. Das Shuttle nähert sich jetzt der kritischen Höhe zwischen 100 und 50 Kilometern. Feuerschein dringt durch die Cockpitfenster, wie diese Archivbilder zeigen. Der zunehmende Luftwiderstand heizt den Hitzeschild bis auf 1700 Grad auf. 14:52 Uhr. Die Bodenstation bemerkt den Ausfall verschiedener Temperatursensoren an der linken Tragfläche. 14:55 Uhr. Jetzt schlagen auch Temperatursensoren im linken Fahrwerksschacht Alarm. Minuten später ruft die Bodenstation Houston das Shuttle über Funk.
And Columbia, Houston, we see your tire pressure messages and we did not copy your last. Roger.
Dann knackt und rauscht es nur noch im Funk. Der Hitzeschild an der linken Tragfläche scheint versagt zu haben. Das Shuttle bricht innerhalb von Sekunden auseinander. Die 7 Astronauten an Bord konnten nicht mehr antworten.
Here are some thoughts from former astronauts reflecting on their comrades and the risks of spaceflight.
I'm still thinking more about the loss. I'm confident that NASA has already started the process of doing everything that it can to try to understand the technical issues and the technical problems that led to the tragedy. You know, my thoughts the moment that I realized what was happening and realized what a horrible day we were in for, my thoughts went back to the Challenger accident and, you know, just said, oh no, you know, another day like this.
Well, I think, number one, having come out of the Navy test pilot corps and having flown off of aircraft carriers and flown in combat, you recognize that there's a certain amount of threat to your life in those kinds of activities. So I guess that's part of the piloting character in the adventurous group. But there's also a defensive mechanism where you say it can't happen to me. And I think we all take refuge in that. And then you just are a bit scared.
I was watching the re-entry. I usually try to watch the launches and the re-entry. And when it went off the air at that critical point, I thought there was very deep trouble, and there was. And so it was a very tragic day, and our thoughts and our prayers go out to the family. It's tough on them. But, you know, these people lost their lives in doing work that they wanted to do, and it was important for everybody.
The hometown of the space program is also grieving for the loss of the astronauts. A memorial service is planned in Houston, Texas on Tuesday. But as Aaron Brown reports, the town isn't waiting until then to express its sorrow.
All day long they came. They came with flowers. Parents came with the very young who could not really understand. Indeed, you began to see the difference between knowing with your head and believing with your heart.
Just couldn't believe it. It's unfathomable. You know, I remember where I was when it happened a few years back, and here I am today.
What would have been a routine Sunday bicycling ride for NASA's Bicycling Club was something quite different today.
We're having a really difficult time accepting the fact that this took place. And on the ride yesterday, the phones were ringing off the hook, even on the back of the cyclists. You could hear phones everywhere. People were being informed, and we had a memorial after the ride.
At Grace Community Church, the memorials had a special poignancy. Two of the shuttle's crew members, the commander, Rick Husband, and the payload commander, Mike Anderson, were both members. And church members say they didn't just show up on Sunday. They played a regular and important role in the life of their church.
Yes, Rick was very active in the church. He was. He sang a lot of solos.
A tremendous family man. Such a wonderful example of a great father and husband.
Members of Congress were at the service as well, promising the familiar. Space exploration, despite its risks and despite today's sorrow, will go on.
The reason I was here today is to reaffirm the love that this nation has for a very exciting space program, and likewise to be very direct by saying that the space program will not end, and that this is no time to look for accusations as much as it is to look for facts.
In the remote ranch country of East Texas, today was a day for connections as well. More than 1,000 pieces of the shuttle's wreckage fell here, including these 20 or so segments, pieces of pipe, insulation, even a big segment of the tiles on the ranch of Lindy Hinson.
I went down, fed my heifers, and maybe, I don't know, 8 to 10 minutes later, I was down there, and this piece I was showing you, it hit the barn down there.
It's in town. It's just about on every place around here. Through this area, right here where Mr. Henson is, was a pretty good debris field. The, maybe some of the larger stuff fell, and there's lots of the tiles that have come loose.
Even in winter, the landscape here is beautiful. And Lindy Hinson knows that from now on, his ranch will have a small but special place in the history of manned space travel and the risk it entails.
My boy came home yesterday. Them other boys didn't.
Aaron Brown, CNN, Houston.
And I'll be back with an update of the main stories just after this short break. Don't go away.
Between soldiers and police. We're told by a source here.
You're watching Your World Today. Hello, I'm John Vors.
Hello, I'm Daljit Dhaliwal. Now, throughout the hour, we will be looking at the ongoing investigation into the tragedy of the Space Shuttle Columbia and how it might affect the future of space exploration.
Meanwhile, the family of Israeli astronaut Ilan Raman makes the trip to retrieve their son's remains. We'll hear how they're coping with their loss. Also, we want to know whether you think space travel should continue in light of this disaster.
In other news, United Nations weapons inspectors in Iraq find leftovers from earlier missile production. We're going to start with the latest developments in the Space Shuttle Columbia tragedy. NASA has released a videotape showing a close-up view of the shuttle's liftoff. It clearly shows some sort of debris crashing into the orbiter's left wing. NASA has said the left wing was hit from insulation from the fuel tanks 80 seconds after blastoff, but engineers believed no serious damage had been done to the heat shields. In other developments, the US President George W. Bush has met NASA's administrator Sean O'Keefe at the White House. Mr. Bush will travel to Texas on Tuesday for a memorial service at the Johnson Space Center. Memorials are also being held in many areas around the world, and condolences have been coming in from across the globe. Meanwhile, the investigation is now focusing on a sharp increase in temperature and drag on the left side of the shuttle and on attempts by flight control to counter the drag by rolling to the right.
Debris from the Space Shuttle Columbia is still being gathered. Many of the pieces are to be taken to Barksdale Air Force Base in Louisiana. Mike Brooks is following the investigation from Barksdale, and he joins us now with an update. Mike, what can you tell us?
Hello, John. Here at Barksdale Air Force Base, the investigation continues into the Columbia tragedy. There are two groups that are based here at Barksdale Air Force Base that are extremely important in this investigation. The first is the Columbia Accident Investigation Board, headed up by retired Navy four-star Admiral Harold Gaiman. This is the board that will give the overall findings once the investigation is completed. The other is a mishap investigation team. Michael Kostelnik, the NASA Deputy Administrator, spoke today at a press conference about this team with over 150 members.
We have a lot of activity ongoing today. There's, again, a focus on the recovery of the human remains, mostly in the Lufkin area, mostly with the FBI and EPA teams in concert with the NASA representatives. These will be augmented in terms of protecting the physical sites where material is located by the Texas National Guard. We expect that number could be as high ultimately as about 500 individuals over the next day, and the NASA footprint today and tomorrow will ultimately grow to about 150 or so individuals.
Now, this mishap investigation team is a NASA team. It's composed of members from other government agencies that are assisting NASA, but it is being run by NASA themselves. Also here at Barksdale Airport, the remains of the astronauts are being brought. Yesterday, the remains of some of the astronauts were brought here by Black Hawk helicopter, where they will be identified by forensic teams to hopefully give the families some closure on this awful tragedy. John?
Mike, I know this is very, very early days in the investigation, and we've been warned that we'll get some misleading statements. We'll go down some roads where we're not quite too sure where we're actually heading. But at this stage, a lot is focused on that piece of foam or ice which hit the left wing on takeoff of the shuttle, and that may have done some damage to a wheel well and penetrating a door which protected that, causing all sorts of problems. Can you bring us up to date on where the investigation is heading as far as that's concerned?
Well, John, they're looking at a number of different things, the foam being one of them. As we have seen in some of the slow-motion video, it looked like a piece of that foam did come off and possibly strike the wing. They're looking at that. They're also looking at the possibility of the tiles on the underside of the shuttle vehicle, that maybe one of them could have come loose. They're looking at a number of different things now. Now, hopefully, some of the evidence is being brought back here to Barksdale Air Force Base will be able to shed some light on the tragedy. John?
Okay, CNN's Mike Brooks reporting for us live there from Barksdale, Louisiana. Thank you, Mike.
Durchlässig für die tödliche Hitze oder was sonst führte zum Absturz der Columbia. Jetzt wird über Fernsehbilder diskutiert, die deutlich einen Riss am linken Flügel zeigen. Die NASA wird auch dieser Spur nachgehen. Sie ermittelt mit Hochdruck.
Barksdale Air Force Base, Louisiana. Hier werden die Experten der NASA das Untersuchungszentrum einrichten, in dem die Wrackteile der Unglücksfähre Columbia seit vergangener Nacht zusammengetragen werden. Über 2 Landkreise verstreut wurden Überreste gefunden vom Shuttle und von seiner Besatzung. Man glaubt, so viel identifizieren zu können, dass wohl alle Astronauten eine Beerdigung haben werden. Die Untersuchung der Flugdaten konzentriert sich immer stärker auf die linke Seite der Raumfähre. Dass sich beim Start etwas vom Zusatztank gelöst hatte, war bekannt. Immer wieder werden jetzt diese Bilder geprüft. Wurde damals der Flügel beschädigt? War das die Ursache für die Katastrophe beim Wiedereintritt in die Atmosphäre? Bilder aus Israel zeigen einen Blick aus der Raumfähre auf den Flügel. Deutlich ist ein Riss zu sehen. Der Leiter des NASA-Raumfahrtprogramms verlas heute einen offenen Brief der Crew-Angehörigen. Wenn die Gründe für das Unglück gefunden und korrigiert worden sind, muss die Mission von Columbia fortgeführt werden, zum Wohle der nächsten Generation. Im Weißen Haus ließ sich Präsident Bush am Vormittag vom NASA-Chef Sean O'Keefe über die Untersuchungen persönlich unterrichten. Morgen wird er zu einer Trauerfeier nach Houston reisen.
Gundula Koch ist für uns in Houston bei der NASA. Seit der Katastrophe vom Samstag heißt es ja immer wieder, es sei zuletzt einfach zu wenig Geld in die Shuttle-Projekte geflossen. Was ist denn dran an solchen Vorwürfen?
Nun, das Budget der NASA ist in den letzten 12 Jahren nicht erhöht worden. Stattdessen gab es immer wieder Kürzungen bei verschiedenen Projekten. Eine unabhängige Organisation soll jetzt herausfinden, ob es einen Zusammenhang gibt zwischen den Streichungen und möglichen Sicherheitsmängeln. Außerdem hat der amerikanische Präsident verkündet, dass die NASA mehr Geld erhalten soll, ganze 240 Millionen $. Das sieht man hier als Grund dafür, dass die amerikanische Regierung die finanziellen Probleme der NASA erkannt hat und auch ernst nimmt. Aber bei aller Ursachenforschung sollte man in diesen Tagen die Trauer hier nicht vergessen. Morgen wird hier in Houston ein großer Gottesdienst stattfinden zu Ehren der 7 verstorbenen Astronauten.
Vielen Dank, Gundula Koch. Gleich nach dem Unglück hatte die NASA ja alle Shuttleflüge abgesagt. Doch gerade die Raumflüge der Amerikaner sind für die internationale Raumstation ISS enorm wichtig. Tonnen von Material und auch die Astronauten wurden regelmäßig mit den Space Shuttles dorthin gebracht. Als Aushilfe bieten sich jetzt die Russen an. Soyuz und Progress könnten der Raumfahrtnation wieder zu Glanz verhelfen.
Frische Blumen im Schnee vor den Botschaften der USA und Israels. Die Raumfahrtnation Russland trauert um die Besatzung der Columbia. Eine Tragödie ist das, zu verunglücken, so kurz vor der Haustür. Ich habe geweint, denn diese Menschen haben ihr Leben geopfert für die Wissenschaft. Von vielen schon abgeschrieben, jetzt wieder im Blickpunkt die Kosmostechnik der Russen. Gestern in Baikonur, ein Transporter vom Typ Progress hebt ab. Er bringt Treibstoff und Lebensmittel zur internationalen Raumstation ISS. Deren Besatzung, 2 Amerikaner und ein Russe, sind damit versorgt bis Ende Juni. Wir können noch mehr Versorgungsgüter und auch Menschen hochfliegen zur ISS mit unseren Raumschiffen Soyuz und Progress. Das Einzige, was wir dafür brauchen, ist ausreichend Geld. Ihr Start ist bezahlt. Die Russen Malenchenko und Kaleri sowie der China-Amerikaner Edward Lu werden als nächste Besatzung zur ISS fliegen am 28. April mit einer russischen Soyuz. Ich bin froh, dass es bald losgeht. 2 Jahre lang haben wir dafür trainiert. Auf dem Raumfahrtbahnhof Baikonur sind 2 Soyuz-Kapseln startklar. Die Russen könnten mehr bereitstellen, sollten die Amerikaner dafür bezahlen.
Well, NASA has grounded its space shuttle program indefinitely after the loss of Columbia. But how will the disaster affect the future of space travel from the European standpoint? To talk about that, I'm joined from London by David Wade. He's a satellite analyst for a British insurance company. Many thanks for joining us. Let me start by asking you, Mr. Wade, could you connect the dots for us? I mean, is the space shuttle disaster likely to have an adverse effect from a European standpoint?
I think it's important, first of all, to make the distinction between the commercial space activities in Europe, which will really continue unaffected by this, and the scientific viewpoint from Europe, which will be greatly affected by this. First of all, Europe relied on the space shuttle to take its astronauts into space. Europe does not have an independent access to space.
So,
I think that...
Sorry, finish.
That really is the first aspect. You know, we have relied on the US. Yes, there are some launches on the Russian Soyuz vehicle, but that can only carry a crew of 3 as opposed to the 7 that could be carried on the space shuttle. So I think the first impact is going to be on the number of Europeans who can now travel to the fledgling International Space Station.
Do you think that European governments will respond in the appropriate fashion and try and make sure that there is more input from a European point of view, or is that completely impossible to do?
Well, within Europe, all of the individual budgets, national budgets that contribute to the European Space Agency are all shrinking at the moment. The European Space Agency itself, its budget is decreasing all of the time. So I think we are going to see huge problems resulting from this. First of all, because the modules are all going to be delayed. The space shuttle is going to be grounded for some considerable length of time, 18 months, 2 years perhaps. And those programs within Europe have to continue. So the engineers have to be kept occupied. You can't just put the module in a hangar and leave it on hold. You've got to continue working that program, which is going to cost many hundreds of millions of euros to support those programs in the interim until those modules can be launched. And I think it's on top of a time when budgets are shrinking. I think that money is going to be incredibly difficult to find, and whether or not it really results in the end of Europe's participation in the International Space Station, we'll really have to wait and see.
What's your hunch? I mean, would you, if you had a crystal ball, what would you think was going to happen?
I really think we're going to see a redesign of the International Space Station. I think we're going to see Europe's participation in it scaled back considerably. It's already been scaled back to a single module, the Columbus module, which was due to be launched in around about 2005. I think we're going to see some further consideration of whether or not we can really continue down that route, or whether we start combining US, European, Japanese modules into a much smaller scale station, which, when the shuttle is flying again, will continue its construction.
All right, David Wade, many thanks for joining us there from London.
Und wir hatten das vor uns liegen. Ich habe damit ehrlich gesagt nicht gerechnet. Obwohl man natürlich weiß, dass es lebensgefährlich sein kann. Wir haben uns das angeschaut. Aber ich meine, man füllt das einfach aus, und zwar besten Gewissens, was man wirklich machen würde. Und ich habe mir Kopien davon gemacht, die ich heute noch habe.
Beim Eintritt in die Erdatmosphäre verglühte das Space Shuttle regelrecht. Auch die Familienangehörigen bekamen live mit, als die Bodenstation den Funkkontakt mit der Columbia verlor. Columbia, hier ist Houston, wir sehen eure Temperaturanzeigen steigen. Wir haben euren letzten Funkspruch nicht verstanden. Das letzte Lebenszeichen der Astronauten. Für alle war sofort klar, dass keiner der Astronauten überlebt hat. Um 15 Uhr deutscher Zeit ist genau das eingetreten, worüber in der Ausbildung immer wieder gesprochen wurde. Auch Dr. Uwe Hoffmann verliert 7 Arbeitskollegen und zugleich 7 Freunde.
In Texas und in Florida herrschten hervorragende Wetterbedingungen, sodass man eigentlich auch erwarten konnte, dass eine Bilderbuchlandung stattfinden würde. Und dann in solch einer Situation festzustellen, dass also solch ein Unglück passiert, das war schon eine ziemliche Katastrophe und eine auch persönliche Erschütterung, die man dann verspürt. Und man weiß eigentlich in dem Moment nicht, mit den Gefühlen so richtig umzugehen.
Bereits vor ihrer Mission schrieben einige sogar ihr Testament. Und immer wieder stellten sie sich vorher die Frage, was ist wenn? Kurz zuvor gab William McCool im Internet dazu ein Interview. Ich glaube, es ist wichtig, für den Moment zu leben und nicht 30 Jahre im Voraus zu planen. Für einige war es die Erfüllung eines Traumes, einmal den Blick von ganz oben genießen zu dürfen. Doch was wussten die 7 Astronauten wirklich über ihr Schicksal? Hatten sie eine Vorahnung? Ulrich Walter weiß, wie die NASA den Menschen vor Abflug die Angst nimmt.
Was die Astronauten machen, sie machen eine Barbecue-Feier. Es gibt ein kleines Landhaus am Strand von Kennedy Space Center, übrigens nicht weit entfernt von der Startrampe, nur 1 Kilometer entfernt. Und dort gibt es vorher eine Barbecue-Party, dort lädt man sich Freunde und Verwandte ein, dort wird vorher gefeiert, so eine Art Abschiedsfeier. Und dort ist die Stimmung grandios.
Alle 7 Astronauten sind tot, gestorben bei der Erfüllung ihres Traumes. Sie hatten sich von ihren Familien verabschiedet, obwohl sie vorher darauf hingewiesen wurden, dass sie vielleicht ihr Leben im All lassen müssen. Eigentlich sollte es ein Abschied sein, auf Zeit.
Satinder Bindra takes us to her hometown to see how they're remembering a local hero. That story is coming up next. Cheers.
Okay, we're going to return now to our top story, the loss of the Space Shuttle Columbia. Memorials for the lost astronauts are being held around the world.
The loss has been taken especially hard in the astronauts' homelands. Indian-born astronaut Kalpana Chawla is being hailed as a role model for other Indian women. CNN's Satinder Bindra has that story.
2 days after her death, Indians continue to come out in large numbers to pay homage to U.S. astronaut Kalpana Chawla. Kalpana was born in Karnal, a small town 120 kilometers or 75 miles north of the Indian capital. Television pictures of her craft breaking apart watched by millions, unleashed a wave of national sympathy. Kalpana has now become an icon, a symbol of Indian dreams and accomplishment.
I would like her to be known for having achieved the impossible. Saying is something. Practically achieving it is what I would like her to be known for.
While growing up in this small town, Kalpana defied convention, revolting against the stereotypical 70s image of an Indian woman, content just to stay at home. Kalpana became the first woman in her university to study aeronautical engineering. Then she migrated to the United States for higher studies. When she flew her first space mission in 1997, Kalpana defined a new kind of Indian woman, the overachiever. Now it's Indian women who mourn her loss the most. But says her friend Dr. Manju Gupta, Kalpana will live on.
There are people in the world who should not die with their death, with their physical death. They have to live on in the hearts of people and continue to inspire them.
In Kalpana's honor, the town where she was born has already declared 2 days of mourning. Kalpana's brother says his family is grateful for all the love and affection.
Seeing the reactions of my countrymen, the people of my hometown, that is Karnal, and seeing the reactions of all these people has actually lightened my sadness in a very big way.
For all her stature in the United States, Kalpana never forgot her roots. Now, many in this country of 1 billion people want to reaffirm those ties. They're appealing to the Indian government to honor Kalpana with an award. This, they say, will keep her memory alive and ensure she lives on in Indian hearts. Satinder Bindra, CNN, New Delhi.
Okay, I want to take a short moment now to read out some of your responses to our question of the day.
We're asking, in the light of the Columbia disaster, do you think that manned space travel is still worthwhile? And we're going to read out a couple of your emails. What have you got, John?
And it really is. Everybody's saying the same thing. Mario in Austria, he's right. He writes, I do think that manned space flights are worthwhile. Of course, there are dangers, but there are no relation to the great benefits those scientific endeavors bring to humanity.
Okay, here's one from Paolo writing in the Philippines, and it says the benefits to humanity resulting from research done in space missions far outweighs whatever dangers there may be. Investigators will ultimately shed light as to what caused the tragedy and will result in the development of a much safer way to travel into space.
Here's a nice one. Maurizio in the UK writes, yes, it's worthwhile. If we were to stop now, it would offend the memories of all the dead astronauts.
Okay, we're also going to take a quick look at our quick vote, and we're asking the same question there, and it says 89% of you say that space travel should continue, 11% say that it shouldn't. So many thanks for responding to our emails and also for taking part in the quick vote. Still to come in the programme, a live report with the latest into the Columbia disaster investigation. Also more on the international reaction to the tragedy.
And in other news, we'll examine the changing of the guard in Prague as a cold warrior for peace steps aside. You're watching CNN.
US President George W. Bush is briefed by top NASA officials on the investigation of this shuttle tragedy.
Investigators have promised to find out what went wrong.
It is 2 p.m. in Washington.
This is Your World Today.
In our top story, the investigation into the loss of the space shuttle Columbia is underway. Meanwhile, the US President George W. Bush just a few hours ago met with NASA Administrator Sean O'Keefe. And Mr. Bush plans to attend a memorial at the Johnson Space Center on Tuesday. For details from the White House, let's go to Dana Bash, who is standing by there. Hello there, Dana.
Hi, Daljeet. Well, I should tell you that the president actually just arrived in Bethesda, Maryland. He is speaking to the National Institutes of Health. It was a pre-planned speech to talk about part of his budget, which is to give some money to help with preventative measures for bio attacks like anthrax and other things. However, we are told that he is going to make some comments there about the situation with the sad situation with NASA and the space shuttle explosion. But as you said earlier today, the president did meet with the NASA administrator, Sean O'Keefe. He came here, he met for about 45 minutes with the president, and he also, the vice president was there, and the White House chief of staff, Andy Card. It was closed to the press, but White House spokesman Ari Fleischer tells us that the president said to O'Keefe, "You make us proud." He also said that the men discussed the future of the space station, the president telling him that he is absolutely committed to the future of space flight, I should say. And he also talked about the fact that he really wants to get to the bottom of what happened, and he will do whatever it takes to do that. However, the White House is not, at this point, going to offer a blue ribbon panel. They're not going to have a separate White House-based commission. That's something that happened after the Challenger explosion in 1986. At this point, they're saying there are 2 investigations going on. Right now, they're going to leave it at that. But the other thing that has been talked about over the last 48 hours since this explosion is the issue of funding for NASA. The president, in his budget, he sent up his new budget for next year today, and in that budget he is calling for $500 million in additional funding for NASA, and it's really an important thing for NASA, they say, to get more money. But we should note also in that budget, along with that, came a couple of words from the Office of Management and Budget, which puts this together, saying that there is no clear measurable relationship between the investments in the space shuttle and improvements in the shuttle's operational life. And it says that there does need to be more efficiency in how the money that the government gives to NASA is dealt with. Daljeet.
And Dana, we heard a lot about the falling budgets. Would they also be part of any investigation that might be carried out?
Well, the White House at this point is saying that they are going to stay away from it. They're going to let NASA do its internal investigation. Then, of course, NASA has appointed an independent board to investigate. Like I said, in the past, there has been a White House appointed commission, but at this point, they're saying they're going to let things go.
Second, because we are listening to some comments that President George W. Bush is making. He is speaking in Maryland, and let's listen.
NIH is a great credit to America. Two days ago, America was yet reminded again of the sacrifices made in the name of scientific discovery. The 7 brave men and women from the Columbia will be remembered for their achievements, their heroism, and their sense of wonder. Our prayers are with their families and their loved ones. Their 16-day mission held the promise of answering scientific problems that elude us here on Earth. Columbia carried in its payroll classroom experiments from some of our students in America. I hope these children, our future scientists, will continue to ask questions, continue to explore, continue to discover. And while we grieve the loss of these astronauts, the cause in which they died will continue. America's journey into space will go on.
I want to get every last shred of evidence, whether it be documentation, whether it be witness statements, whether it be physical evidence that may have fallen to the ground, and put that into the pieces of the jigsaw puzzle that we will start to assemble so that we can identify the root cause.
NASA officials say the primary focus of their ground search right now is to locate the remains of the lost astronauts. And there will be a memorial service in Houston on Tuesday for the Space Shuttle Columbia's 7 astronauts. CNN will bring you live coverage of that service. It begins at 1800 GMT.
Bei der Suche nach den Ursachen des Columbia-Absturzes verdichten sich die Hinweise darauf, dass die linke Tragfläche möglicherweise schon beim Start beschädigt wurde. Diese Theorie stützen Videoaufzeichnungen der NASA. Durch die Aussetzung aller Shuttle-Flüge ist vorerst auch der Ausbau der internationalen Raumstation ISS blockiert.
Die New Yorker Börse legte eine Schweigeminute zum Gedenken an die 7 Astronauten ein. Auch in vielen amerikanischen Schulen wird getrauert. Weitere Hunderte von Ermittlern sind eingesetzt worden, um den Nordosten von Texas nach Tausenden von Trümmerteilen zu durchkämmen. An mehreren Orten wurden bisher auch Leichenteile der Astronauten gefunden. Unsere Hauptverantwortung da draußen ist es im Moment, trotz der offenen Fragen, die Überreste unserer Helden zu bergen und sie so schnell wie möglich zu ihren Familien zurückzubringen. Aus der Sicht von Experten scheint sich der Verdacht zu erhärten, dass Schäden am Hitzeschild den Absturz verursacht haben. Möglicherweise ist der linke Flügel beim Start der Columbia durch abbrechendes Isoliermaterial beschädigt worden. Der Schaumstoff war von einem Außentank abgerissen und gegen die linke Tragfläche geprallt. Ob dadurch tatsächlich Risse in der Außenhaut entstanden sind, ist ungeklärt. Man weiß jedoch, dass 22 Minuten vor der geplanten Landung die Temperatur im linken Flügel um 16 Grad anstieg. Die Raumfähre kam ins Trudeln, der Kontakt brach ab. Die NASA bemüht sich, weitere 32 Sekunden Computerdaten zu retten, die möglicherweise entscheidende Informationen enthalten. NASA-Chef Jean O'Keefe kam heute nach Washington, um Präsident Bush über den derzeitigen Ermittlungsstand zu informieren und um über die Zukunft der amerikanischen Raumfahrt zu sprechen.
Bei der Challenger-Katastrophe vor 17 Jahren waren alle Annahmen der ersten Wochen über die Unglücksursache falsch. Deshalb sind die NASA-Offiziellen jetzt sehr vorsichtig. Aber was immer die Spurensuche ergeben wird, eines steht fest: der Etat der NASA wird steigen. Der Präsident will, dass die Shuttle-Flüge so schnell wie möglich wieder aufgenommen werden. Die NASA macht uns stolz, sagte er heute.